The final chapter is out, and I'm ready to present my Season 2 version of less meta team building. I also have some errata for my Season 1 video, and there's the new unlocked potential characters, and originally I was thinking that I'd talk about those in a second video, but now that the Season 3 trailer has come out, I really want to talk about that, so I've decided I'm cramming everything together all in this one. Sorry about the length, but as usual, I just want to get everything out of the way in one go. I promise that you will not hurt my feelings if you use the chapters to just skip to what you want. Starting off, let's briefly revisit the idea of keywords, since most of the cast is sporting new ones and often a few extras. In fact, at this point, even the specialties themselves, attack, anomaly, support, defense, stun, and now rupture, pretty much just feel like keywords themselves. The newest characters haven't felt the need to maintain any standard features like we saw in Season 1, such as support characters giving energy or defense characters having shields. So without splitting up support buffs by what stat they buff, we really only have two new keywords: Ether Veil and Sheer Force. Ether Veil is just a new support effect that applies to the whole battlefield, effectively team. The buff itself tends to be very minor, so its relevance is pretty much just exclusively as a keyword used by specific characters or the rotating endgame buff modifiers. In practice, it's just a tool the devs can use to encourage the use of alternate supports, a way to diversify the roster within a specialization without as much power creep. Only one Ether Veil effect can be active at a time, so triggering a new Ether Veil will override any existing one, but I'm not aware of any agent that has any major issues with this. Our other new keyword, Sheer Force, is exclusive to our new specialization, Rupture. An alternative to attack power, the core difference is that attacks that use Sheer Force ignore an enemy's defense stat. The biggest effect this has on gameplay is with team building. Defense shredding agents, like Nicole or Rena, provide no benefit to Sheer Force attacks, so you'll need to rely on other support agents. On top of that, because Rupture agents rely on Sheer Force instead of attack power, this also means that their support options are even more limited. Rupture agents will turn a percentage of any attack power they gain into Sheer Force, so any attack power buffing support, even a weak one like Lucy, still benefits them, it just won't be their best in slot option. Other than that, the new role is just an on-field DPS, exactly like attack agents. The new specialization really only affects team building. Any enemy they excel against, such as an enemy that has a high defense, can still be tackled through defense shredding. While Rupture agents don't work with an agent like Nicole, they don't exactly make her irrelevant either. Finally, with regards to keywords, I'll at least mention Double Attacker, though I don't really consider it a full keyword yet. This was introduced with Seed and can appear in endgame buffs, but currently, Seed is the only dedicated double attacker. The other two related agents, Orphie and Cissia, work very well with a double attack team, but they're also just solid DPS agents in their own right, which can still do significant damage while off-field. In other words, unlike Seed, neither of them actually require a second attack agent to function. Alrighty, I think that covers the newest definition stuff. As for the whole 3-slot team building method, on-field, wildcard, and support, I still think that holds up. So let's get started discussing our newest agents. Yunhui Summit. Yixuan. Slot, on-field. Keywords, on-field DPS, Sheer Force. Yixuan was introduced to us as a Void Hunter level character, though officially she's the Grandmaster of Yunhui Summit. Either way, she does a good job of living up to those titles. Yixuan has two different EX special attacks, two different ultimate attacks, and an extra AoE attack she can occasionally proc to rapidly refill her energy. She also has multiple moves that can dodge or block incoming attacks, and as our first Rupture agent, she also has no need for defense reduction or pen. She's not that overpowered. I still struggle to get high scores out of her myself. But before we talk about my problems, let's first introduce Yixuan's EX special attacks, which will be the bulk of her gameplay. Her basic combo is actually relatively weak. The simpler of the two is triggered by holding down the basic attack button. This will cause Yixuan to create a bubble of damage, not unlike Nicole's EX special. This can be held for a couple of seconds, rapidly dealing damage, but also quickly drains her energy. This attack does decent damage, even if you don't fully charge it, and so it's a useful way of quickly burning off excess energy, or quickly killing off weak mobs, in addition to AoE and grouping. This is also the attack that gets buffed during stun by Yixuan's additional ability, making it the preferred way of converting energy into damage during that window. If timed with an enemy's attack, Yixuan will dodge and also trigger Vital View, the time slow effect, but I don't know of any techniques that build off of intentionally doing that. Her second EX special attack is triggered by holding down the special attack button. When released, this will trigger a relatively slow attack, but one that can be followed up with 2 more attacks by pressing special attack again 2 more times. After those 2 attacks, for an additional energy cost, you can trigger a final AoE attack by pressing the special attack button 1 more time. Altogether, this second EX special does more total damage than the bubble, though it does take more time to complete. Fully charging the first hit further increases the damage, but also makes this attack even slower. Now, if you remember me mentioning her ability to block a moment ago, here's where that comes in. If you're attacked while charging the first hit, or if you block by timing your special attack button with an enemy's attack, you'll get the benefit of a full charge without the wait. And yes, Yixuan can cancel into this block for most attacks, so you're kind of wasting time if you're relying on charging to block. Blocking an attack like this also refunds you 10 energy. However, a very important detail for this block is that you can only trigger it when you have the 40 energy required. No energy means no block. You can still trigger a dodge with a regular special, but it's weak and nothing really builds off of that. So you're better off assisting or dodge countering when energy isn't available. Speaking of energy, Yixuan has several additional methods of generating more. She gets some from proccing an anomaly, she gets some after a dodge counter, and with her additional ability, which is pretty easy to build around, she generates some anytime a team member uses an ultimate, and she gets a bit anytime an ally uses a perfect assist. That's worth knowing, since while Yixuan is a very field-hungry character, with her additional ability, she does get some extra benefits from letting her teammates occasionally tag in, besides just their buffs. Anyway, getting back to the issues I have playing Yixuan, the first problem I run into is restraint. You can deal good damage by just using the Bubble EX special, but this will very quickly drain all of your energy if you channel it, and draining too much energy will prevent you from being able to block. Outside the stun window, I think you want to block as much as possible, since that attack ends up cheaper and the total damage comes out higher. I also just think that it's a lot of fun to completely shut down incoming attacks. Yet, if you sit around waiting for attacks to block, you're not dealing any damage, so you do want to be attacking instead of waiting, and using your bubble attack is the fastest way to quickly burn off excess energy. Just make sure you don't spend that last 40 so you always have a block ready. Another part of my restraint issue comes from being a button mashy player. If you're trying to attack constantly between blocks, then maybe sometimes you basic attack after a block instead of triggering the follow-up attacks with the special attack button. Not only is this much weaker, but you're also not invulnerable doing that, like you are with the EX special combo. So maybe you also walk headfirst into incoming hits. You do not want to do this. Yixuan isn't that hard to play, but there's still plenty of room to make bad choices. As for the rest of her kit, as you spend Yixuan's energy, you will fill up her gauge. When this is full, you can trigger her second ultimate. It's all shiny and gold and doesn't use any decibels. Using this ultimate will also give her a point next to her gauge, which allows her to use an additional attack, which is triggered by holding down the dodge button. There's a brief charge before that attack starts, but you can skip this by holding dodge during either of her ultimates. She'll immediately follow up those with this auric array attack. Aside from AoE and being invulnerable, the most important part of this extra attack is that while the animation is playing, and Yixuan is on field, she'll generate additional energy. Tack this on as another problem regarding restraint, since this long animation is a fantastic time to tag in another teammate, but doing so means giving up the energy. You can use this attack, or at least a similar enough one, without the auric ink point. Doing this does much less damage, and doesn't generate the extra energy, so it's really only useful for grouping enemies, which, admittedly, it is really good at. It has a much wider area and pull than her bubble special. Which finally brings me to the second issue I've had with playing Yixuan, figuring out the rest of her team. Yixuan's built for hypercarry, so you'll want her teammates to spend as little time on field as they can. Pan Yinhu, who we'll talk about next, is an easy include in the wildcard slot, since he's a dedicated rupture support, and also has a reverse quick assist. As for the support slot, it really depends on your account. There are a number of Season 2 characters who can fill the support slot, since, as we'll eventually be seeing, this slot has gotten a lot more flexible in Season 2. But ignoring those Season 2 options, since we haven't talked about them yet, for Season 1 characters, the devs did update a couple of legacy agents to also enable their additional ability with Rupture agents. Those being Kaleda, Pulchra, and Astriao. Kaleda's probably the weakest of those three, since Yixuan doesn't really get any benefits from her chain attack, and doesn't have a particularly strong one herself, but Kaleda's burst stun is still better than nothing. From what I saw elsewhere on the YouTubes, Pulchra is a pretty popular support agent, provided you have her M6, though I haven't tried her since I still screw up my character swaps. With Pulchra also having a reverse swap, like Pan, and Pulchra punishing you for switching to her accidentally, I tend to avoid using her when I'm not running her wildcard. So I've been relying on Astra, especially since I lucked into Astra's signature weapon while pulling for Pan Yinhu's. Attack power is weaker for Rupture agents, but it's still a buff all the same, and Astra's damage and crit buffs and disc buff all still work just fine. Additional notes. Yixuan, and I think all current Rupture agents, gains a percentage of her health as sheer force. To be blunt, HP is a better stat for her than attack. There's nothing else I have to say about that, but I figured I had to squeeze it in here somewhere. Yixuan's ultimates equalize the entire team's health as a percentage, as a pseudo-heal. Healing doesn't tend to be super important in the long run, hence why this is an additional note, but it certainly doesn't hurt. This does let her make use of her larger health pool, since Yixuan doesn't spend her health like some other Rupture agents will. I used the word energy in this breakdown, which is technically incorrect. Rupture agents use adrenaline instead of energy. This means they don't benefit from the energy regen stat or any energy granted from other agents, unless that agent specifically says they generate adrenaline. In practice, at least for me, you won't ever notice the difference. There's one exception to that, but we haven't gotten to Manato yet. Anyway, you'll likely understand everything I said just fine by calling it energy, so I won't bother to use the correct term unless I think it's relevant. Pan Yinhu. Slot, wildcard. Keywords, sheer force support. A defense agent in name only, Pan's really just a wildcard support for Rupture teams. Swap him in, trigger his EX special, quick swap out, profit. It's worth noting that while attack power scales into sheer force for Rupture agents, the reverse is not true. Rupture agents are the only agents in the game that receive any benefit from gaining sheer force. This means that there's no reason to use Pan without a Rupture agent, but it also keeps him simple to use. No sharing the buff with the whole team shenanigans to worry about this time. Pan only gives his sheer force buff to his reverse quickswap target, so make sure you only run Pan to the right of your Rupture agent, or else you can't get any benefit from his sheer force. Additional notes. After using his EX special and quick swapping out, Pan will follow up off-field with 3 Touch of Death attacks. You can manually trigger those attacks while on field with the special attack button, but they're pretty slow attacks, so it's best to always trigger his quick swap correctly. Pan has a really slow defensive assist follow-up, so he may not be available during multiple chain assists. This can really catch you off guard if your third agent has an evasive assist, like if you're using Astra, as they'll pop up in the middle of the chain since Pan won't be ready. I don't have any advice for this, this is just a warning about your swap surprising you. Pan does provide healing with his ultimate, which can be useful as needed. Outside of patching over your mistakes, this does give him some extra utility when paired with Rupture agents that get bonuses from consuming health. Those agents don't get their benefits when they're at their minimum health, so any extra healing is always a boon. This isn't about playing him, but I am looking forward to Pan's next rerun so I can get more copies of his signature weapon. Buffing attack, EX special damage, and ultimate damage certainly isn't bad, and it's way better than the other non-signature defense weapon options. I really want to have a maxed out version that I can use for an on-field Caesar build. Fufu. Slot, versatile. Keywords, aftershock, stun, and support. I lost my 50-50 for Fufu, so I'm not super familiar with her, though I've experimented with her a bit in Hollow Zero, so I think I can at least do her less meta justice. The easiest version is to just run her like a support. Tag her into EX special, and then tag her out. Her Tiger's Roar buff lasts 30 seconds, and after triggering it the first time, she'll pretty much maintain the buff with 100% uptime, even if you never swap to her ever again. Don't actually do that, please spend her energy, I'm just highlighting that she's very low maintenance. Jufufu's core mechanic involves her gauge, which is called Might. She fills this gauge with her little popcorn popper robot, Yue, who always remains on field snapping at enemies while slowly building up to Might. When Might reaches 100 or more, Huei's attack will instead trigger an aftershock chain attack along with Jufufu, which is the core of her off-field damage and impact. You also gain a large chunk of Might when using her EX special or ultimate. Jufufu has another mechanic, Momentum Stacks, which she gains a variable amount of when she does an assist follow-up, EX special, or ultimate, and she can hold up to 15 stacks. You spend those by doing a dash attack with Jufufu while holding down the basic attack button. Jufufu will then hop on Yue and start spinning around. Without any momentum, this is a very weak attack and not worth your time. But when Jufufu does have momentum, it'll now do fire damage and each hit will generate 25 Might. This is a little bit more Might and procs more frequently than Huei's passive attacks, leading to more frequent aftershocks. Another, currently minor, detail about that momentum dash attack is that when ticking up to 100 Might, or when already over 100 Might, it will instead manually trigger Jufufu's aftershock on field. For now, that's only relevant if you want to avoid overcapping on Might, but it might be useful to know in the future if, say, you were able to run Jufufu in co-op. Altogether, with her Tiger's Roar buffing team crit damage, chain attack damage, as well as ultimate damage, on top of Jufufu doing most of her attacks as off-field aftershocks, I think Jufufu is the first stun agent we've gotten you can quite comfortably run in the support slot. I flagged her as versatile since there's no reason you can't run her wildcard either, so between those two slots you can easily include her into pretty much any attack or rupture team you want. Shunguang. Slot, on field. Keywords, on-field DPS, Ether Veil. Our second Void Hunter, Shunguang, is kind of absurdly overpowered. At least with the right teammate or two. On her own, she's not that ridiculous. Her core mechanic is pretty simple. Build up 6 points of Qingming Sword Force, and then you can go all Rage mode on the enemy for 16 seconds. This starts with an entry skill, which you can trigger by either swapping to Shunguang once she has 6 points, or by holding basic attack while she's on field. The passive part of this Rage mode is an Ether Veil effect, which enables the stun damage modifier outside of stun, up to a maximum of 210%. But only for Shunguang's attacks. It doesn't have any effect on the rest of the team. The active part is a completely new moveset, and let's go over that now. Here is a simplified rundown of the Enlightened Mind attacks, no long list of button sequences required. After the entry skill, you will be floating in the air. You are invulnerable up there, so there's no need to panic. To get down, press the special attack button. This will trigger a strong plunging attack and spend 2 sword points. You'll also gain a culmination point, but we can completely ignore that for now. After our plunging attack, we then press the basic attack button. No need to sweat timing, as long as you're not asleep, you'll trigger it. This will trigger a big and powerful sweeping attack, which can block any incoming attack, and you're invincible during it anyway, and consume another sword point. If we then press the special attack button, we'll launch an attack that consumes our culmination point to take us back into the air. And since we're back where we started, we already know how to get back down. After we've landed the second time, we then, once again, follow up with a basic attack, spending our last sword point. We finally end the mode with a strong finisher attack by holding down the special attack button. Now this pattern is not the optimal damage rotation, but it's the shortest and simplest while still spending all of our sword points on the strongest attacks available. Once you're comfortable with that, you can make it a little more complex with a very simple addition. Instead of plunging out of the sky immediately with a special attack, let's just spam basic attacks instead. We're still invulnerable up there, and after 2 swings, we'll finish with the plunge attack anyway. From there, continue as before. We know what the flashiest attacks look like now, so there's not really any strict combos to memorize or patterns to stress over. The final improvement we can make is where things get more challenging, comparatively anyway. Once we've done 2 plunges and 2 sweeping strikes, and used all of our sword points, we probably still have a few seconds left before we run out of Enlightened Mind time. There's no point in wasting our stun damage bonus, so it certainly doesn't hurt to get a few more swings in. Here's a few more notes about that. Most important, do not run out the clock. Shunguang's energy bar is your timer. The finisher, which you trigger by holding down the special attack button, does good damage, but you cannot trigger it if the mode ends. That said, once you've started the finisher attack, the timer stops until all the related strikes complete. All you need to do is make sure that you hold the special attack button before the bar runs out. For those final attacks without the sword points, you are not triggering your flashy invulnerable moves anymore. You actually need to dodge now or you're gonna get whacked. You can dodge using a special attack. You'll have to work on the timing, but it's an attack that also evades, so it's worth working in if you can. If you entered the Enlightened Mind state without using Shunguang's ultimate, the finisher attack is a great time to tag in a teammate. However, if you did enter the state with your ultimate, which always puts you into the Enlightened Mind state, BT dubs, then Shunguang uses a new finisher ultimate instead, and you're effectively stuck watching a cutscene until she's done. Oh, and about that culmination point, don't worry about it. It comes up more if you have Mindscapes, but with the core moves, you'll spend it during the Sky relaunch and during the finisher, so you don't need to worry about it. It just gives you casts of the energy sword spam you'd do during the finisher if you had sword points, but aren't worth spending sword points on. Okay, the OP part is over. What if we're not in the Enlightened Mind state? How do we gain the 6 sword points needed to trigger it? The slow way is just by fighting with Shunguang. She gains a full point after using her EX special, which you can follow up with a basic attack for more damage. Other than that, she slowly builds up points during any attack. You can dodge enemy attacks using a special attack, or an EX special, which builds up additional progress to the point. It's worth doing, but I struggle with the timing because Shunguang's animations move all over the place. It's often not clear when you have control. Speaking of those animations, you can actually get knocked around quite a bit playing Shunguang, if you assume you're invulnerable during all of her attacks. I had a really rough level 45 run through Hollow Zero shortly after getting her. Yes, being underleveled made it much worse, but still, speaking from experience, she's not as invulnerable as you may think, outside the basic sword point moveset we went over. Ignoring all that, the real trick to getting into Enlightened Mind state is with teammates. Note her additional ability. Trigger Ether Veil with one teammate, and those 3 points can get you into the mode pretty quickly. But run 2 allies with Ether Veil, and you'll be spending almost the entire fight being absurdly OP. Sorry, Angels, but no one appreciates Sunna more than Shunguang. If you're all gung-ho about high skill and execution, maybe you'll really dislike the simplicity and excessive invulnerability of Shunguang. Me, I don't hate having an easy mode that I can fall back on when I'm feeling lazy. Just maybe don't rely on her too much, since she's definitely not going to help you learn how to play better. But you do you. Bonus. This one is more speculation than trivia, but I wanted to include it here anyway. I had a prediction prior to 2.5 that Shiyuan, Zhao Guang's brother, would be a playable agent. That obviously did not happen, but I'm currently fine with that. Why? Because I think he still might. More than just the simple idea that they might use an existing character, Yunhui Summit is probably the most geographically restricted faction so far. Aside from Shunguang working as a Void Hunter and Yixuan sometimes contracting with the HIA, there's not really a natural reason for those agents to show up in the story outside the Waifei Peninsula. Plenty of contrived ones, just no natural ones. So I don't exactly hate having Shiyuan out wandering around researching the creator, since he's now a loose thread for conveniently bringing Yunhui Summit back into the main story. One letter from him saying, "I found something," and they're all back in the picture. Another thing I'd like to see, if and when he returns, would be an explanation about Shunguang's and Shiyuan's dual nature. They split white and black color schemes, which I assume is doing a bit of a yin-yang thing, and maybe this dual nature is also helping Shunguang resist the effects of the creator, and by extension the Qingming Blade. But maybe Zhao Guang's inner self is gone now? Obviously not when she's tapping into the power of the blade. I can't explain any of that myself, and completely missed it if the story actually told us what was going on there. Bringing Shiyuan back would be a really good time to actually reveal the unique nature of the two siblings. Finally, seeing as we already have a dearth of male agents, well, Hopefully the devs won't waste one they've already put work into. The waiting and scarcity is already notable enough. Spook Shack. Ukanami Yuzuha. Slot, support. Keywords, support, aftershock. Yuzuha immediately fills a gap in the support roster, that of a dedicated anomaly support. She fills that role in two ways, aside from her attack buff, which affects everyone. The first way is with her additional ability, which adds a small buff to both anomaly and disorder damage. Since disorder was the standard way to run anomaly teams, this is just a solid bonus, especially since anomaly damage already affects disorder damage. The second way she helps anomaly agents is with her Sweet Scare status effect. This is a unique dot she applies to an enemy with either her EX specials or her ultimate. This dot does a small amount of damage, but its bigger benefit is that each tick adds a chunk of progress to the active anomaly effect. In addition, the next teammate that hits that same enemy will change the element of the tick to match their own. And most important, this bonus buildup essentially duplicates the strength of that agent. Yuzuha's anomaly proficiency has no effect on the final damage of the anomaly proc. Since both her EX special and ultimate trigger quick assists, you'll want to make sure that whichever agent you run to the right of Yuzuha is the agent you want to get this bonus buildup. While you can switch which agent gets the boost by controlling who lands the next hit, such as avoiding Yuzuha's quick assist, the flavor match opportunity is reset every time Yuzuha refreshes Sweet Scare, so if you do decide to mix up which element gets the build-up boost, you'll need to remember to swap correctly after every one of Yuzuha's EX special or ultimate attacks. I haven't ever felt like that was worth the effort. Aside from her anomaly support, Yuzuha is also an aftershock agent. She has an aftershock attack that she'll trigger well off-field every 8 seconds as long as she has sugar points. She starts with 3 points and gains points with her defensive assist, EX specials, chain attack, ultimate, and her block. Since this aftershock only triggers every 8 seconds, my experience has been that you generally don't need to worry about Yuzuha running out of points. As long as you're actually using her EX special and ultimate, she'll pretty much always have sugar points. Still, her defensive assist and block are available as regular options if you think she's too low. Yuzuha's extra aftershock damage isn't going to have a major effect on your team's DPS, but free damage is free damage. The most relevant effect is that this means Yuzuha has the aftershock keyword, so when a buff does show up linked with aftershock, this means Yuzuha qualifies. Unfortunately, this aftershock can be a little annoying in practice, since the animation is several seconds long. If you switch to Yuzuha while she's doing it, then you're stuck waiting until she's finished before you can do anything else. You're invulnerable, so you're not going to eat any hits from this, but ZZZ doesn't often make you wait, so anytime you do have to wait, a few seconds can still feel like a relative eternity. Also, seeing as I recently dropped the word block as a way to gain a sugar point, let's talk about that. Yuzuha does have an additional move triggered by holding down basic attack. Do this and she'll pop her umbrella out in front of her, and you can hold it out for up to 1.5 seconds. If attacked while it's out, Yuzuha will block that damage and can then trigger a counterattack in response with the basic attack button. In standard gameplay, this may not come up much, but it is an option available. There is actually some more depth to it, but put a pin in that for now. A more important detail is, while this can stop any attack, there is a short setup time before you can actually block. You'll need to anticipate an enemy's attack in order to actually block it. It's not fast enough to reliably cancel into. Another quirk of Yuzuha's kit is that she can trigger a weaker, but much faster, version of her EX special by using it after a dodge counter, quick assist follow-up, or a perfect dodge. If you're like me, you'll mostly do this unintentionally, but it's something you can try to do on purpose if you want to proc Yuzuha's buff as fast as possible with as little field time as possible. And finally, just to mention it, Yuzuha's ultimate does provide energy to the whole team. Yes, this was a standard feature of the support role back in 1.0, but pretty much none of those standard features are standard anymore. So since energy gain is no longer standard, I figured I'd mention that Yuzuha has it. And speaking of non-standard, the 1.0 version was 10 energy for the off teammate and 20 energy for the quick assist target. Yuzuha's is a flat amount for the whole team, increasing with skill level of her ultimate. Now, seeing as this has been a whole lot of yapping for a support agent, let me just take a brief moment to emphasize that Yuzuha is super simple to use. Most of these details happen in the background. In standard gameplay, you're going to use her like any other support. use her EX special to maintain her buff, ultimate when you think it's best, and focus on your on-field agent. Agent skill descriptions keep getting longer and longer, but in practice, the gameplay is never as complex as the description. Think of the skill description as an owner's manual. It's there if you have any questions, but you can probably get by pretty well if you just toss it in a drawer. Okay? Okay. So Yuzuha has even more depth that isn't really relevant right now, but might be later. Yuzuha has an on-field kit. Shameless plug, but back in my co-op video, I talked about how all of the Season 2 agents seem to be built just a bit better for solo gameplay, such as we would use during co-op. And in that video, I pointed out that Yuzuha does not have a way to spend her sugar points on field. This is true. But looking a bit deeper into Yuzuha's kit for this video, I discovered that she doesn't have to. To start this dive, let's note that Yuzuha has 2 assist follow-up attacks. The major difference between the two is that one is weaker but much faster, ergo the other is stronger but slower. How do you trigger each one? Timing. Yuzuha has a timing minigame after a defensive assist, complete with a sound cue and visual effect. Press the basic attack button during that window, and Yuzuha will use a stronger, slower attack. It's basically just her Aftershock attack, but does more damage in days, and well, isn't an Aftershock attack. Except, it's not just after a defensive assist. Yuzuha can trigger the same timed follow-ups after blocking an attack. The next thing to note is that this stronger, slower attack procs a strong burst of damage from her dot. I didn't mention this before, since it's functionally just a passive part of her Aftershock, but now that we know that we can proc it from a block, well, now we've got an on-field kit that allows access to Yuzuha's full Aftershock kit, but stronger and more frequently. On-field Yuzuha is a block-focused agent where every time you successfully block, with proper timing, you can trigger a souped-up version of her Aftershock attack, complete with bonus sparkle damage. Damage-wise, it's essentially free EX specials on every successfully timed block. Oh, and Yuzuha's Tanuki, will occasionally attack while Yuzuha is off-field, but he also does this attack whenever Yuzuha blocks. So yeah, not super meta or anything, but Yuzuha was designed to be able to access not only her full kit, but a stronger version of it while using her on-field. You can't trigger any Aftershocks, and you can't spend any sugar points, but Yuzuha doesn't actually need either to trigger the relevant attacks. I just think that's neat. Alice Timefield. Slot, versatile. Keywords, anomaly burst. I pulled Yanagi instead of Alice, so I only know Alice's basics. Her core gimmick is her polarized assault. She can trigger this by holding down basic attack while her gauge is full. So it's very similar to Miyabi's Fallen Frost points, which will trigger her Starshine Waltz attack. You can trigger a weaker version of this attack without full etiquette, which also, like Miyabi's Fallen Frost points, you'll pretty much never want to do unless you're dumping points before overcapping, like right before an ultimate. Anyway, the full strength attack is a large AoE, deals plenty of anomaly damage, and also triggers said polarized assault. Polarized assault is an additional, full strength assault proc that can trigger disorder, including with regular assault effects. So Alice will essentially double proc assault and a disorder all at the same time. And her core skill also causes an assault proc to tick a little extra damage, which if cancelled early by a disorder, will buff that disorder damage based on the time remaining. So when you proc assault during her Starshine Waltz, which you probably will, you're basically getting everything at once, all at full strength. It's a big boom. I'm pretty sure that the polarized assault always happens on the last hit, so the common sequence looks like Assault, Polarity Assault, Disorder, and now, since Polarity Assault was the last element, whatever your next anomaly proc is, including another Assault from Alice, will trigger yet another Disorder. As for filling up Alice's gauge, she gets a little from any attack, and she gets another little bit from dodging with her EX special attacks, as well as a bit anytime she procs Assault, but the largest chunks come from triggering Disorders, which requires her additional ability, or from using Alice's ultimate. I only have Hollow Zero to go on, where it's a bit easier and there's often mobs, but she seems to fill up her blade etiquette really fast, just using her own Assault and Disorder procs. Because of that, I think a dedicated Disorder teammate is really just icing on the cake, as opposed to being required to achieve her full potential. I don't think she's as dependent on Disorders as Miyabi is. The final thing I know about Alice is that she has two versions of her EX special, Northern and Southern Cross. You control which one based on whether you motion towards an enemy, or away or no motion, when you trigger your EX special. The forwards version is a bit faster, but a bit weaker, so I imagine it's effectively neutral. Alice can dodge an enemy attack with these EX specials, which as mentioned gives her a bit of blade etiquette, but I don't know if the dodge timing differs with each one. In Hollow Zero, there's a gear that gives your team a different buff when each one is used, so you're encouraged to mix it up, but that's a Hollow Zero thing for now. You can also dodge with Alice's regular special, which doesn't fill her gauge, but does let you skip to the last hit of her basic combo, so certainly doesn't hurt to pull off where you can. Kamino Manato. Slot, versatile. Keywords, on-field DPS, sheer force, bodyguard. You're definitely going to want your Mindscapes, since you don't really have access to Manato's full kit until you hit that M6. Still, even at M6, I find Manato to be a challenging character. He's not bad, and he's certainly viable for endgame content, but there's a few speed bumps on the way. Starting with the basics, Manato's core gimmick is simple. Hold special attack to fill up his gauge. Once it's over a threshold, he'll enter Molten Edge state. This is basically a mandatory state, since it enables his sheer force attacks, as well as all of his related damage buffs. Instead of spending his gauge, like most other characters, Manato's is really just a timer, constantly draining, even if he's off-field, so you'll need to make sure that you're refreshing it. Manato can also max out this gauge with a defensive assist, which is honestly the better option of the two, since Manato rapidly consumes his own health when charging with his special attack. And speaking of his defensive assist, Manato's assist follow-up is actually one of his primary sources of damage. This is where his Mindscapes become a major factor. At M2, Manato gains the ability to trigger his follow-up attack after blocking an enemy hit with his normal special attack. Blocking an attack like this will also heal a chunk of his health once every 20 seconds. At M6, Manato can now trigger his follow-up after hitting a stunned enemy with his regular special attack, which will also give him a few ticks of healing like his additional ability. But mostly this just lets him wail on the enemy during stun. Healing is pretty important to Manato, since his attacks while in Molten state will chip away at his health. He has a 50% crit damage buff from his core skill that is only active when an attack drains his health. Since his attacks won't drain his health lower than 30%, once he's at that minimum, that means he's no longer benefiting from that crit buff, so Manato appreciates any source of additional healing. Next, let's mention his EX special, which is a very strong attack and also heals a large chunk of his health. But here's one of the first places Manato gets a bit more challenging. Not only is this an expensive attack, requiring 80 adrenaline, but Manato has no passive adrenaline generation. Yixuan has 2, Yidhari has 2, Banyue has 2, Manato has Bupkis. His core skill doubles his adrenaline gain from attacks while in Molten Edge state, but he's not getting any adrenaline at all when he's not attacking. This means you'll get to use Manato's EX special about as often as you use his ultimate. And a consequence of not using his EX special as often is that the Rupture Disc set that was released with Yixuan requires regular EX special use, so Manato is not going to get much value from that disc set. The next thing that makes Manato more challenging is that maybe you noticed that he benefits from countering enemy attacks, blocking attacks with his special to trigger his assist follow-up. Well, the issue there is that Manato cannot cancel into that block, and his basic attack 3 and 4 are relatively long animations. This means that you're really only ever going to be able to block an attack by anticipating it. You don't have the option of reacting into it like most other agents with counter mechanics. So that's what I think makes Manato a bit more challenging. He is a strong character, but requires you to constantly manage his health and his gauge, as well as figure out which disc set gives a Rupture agent the best benefit when you rarely use your EX special. Plus, you'll need to anticipate enemy attacks and avoid attack spamming, if you want to be able to consistently trigger one of his most reliable attacks. Now, since this is a less meta breakdown, I will highlight one of Manato's other unique quirks, that is reinforced by his actual character in the story. Maybe you noticed that I flagged his slot as versatile with a questionable wildcard. Well, that's because Manato does indeed make a great bodyguard character. Not only does he have a 1-pip defensive assist, and his assist follow-up is one of his core attacks, but Manato is also, currently, the only character in the game that deals damage with his defensive assist. I'm not talking about the follow-up, but the block itself. It's not a lot of damage, but it's there all the same. So while the endgame challenges really do want your non-on-field slots to contribute some combination of support and or off-field damage, I'll still point out that Manato is probably the strongest bodyguard character in the game, for whatever that is worth. Manato will absolutely take a hit for you. When I was wrapping up my script, writing about Yanagi, it occurred to me that I've never explained the term canceling. I think this is a common term, and no one has said anything in the comments, but just in case anyone has been confused and hasn't bothered to say anything, here's a quick explanation of what I mean by canceling. Canceling is when you press a button, and whatever you were doing immediately stops, and whatever that button does immediately happens. While this can lead to some advanced tricks, it's not something that should ever intimidate you, since you probably do it already intuitively. When you press a button, and that thing happens, that's canceling working its magic. So like with Manato, it's a lot more relevant when you can't cancel. I've seen this a lot in action games over the years, where a game has a block button, but every time you press it, nothing happens, because you were attacking at the time, because of course you were. And if you're like me, you basically decided that the block button was useless. Anyway, I bring that example up just to explain, not to preach about game design. ZZZ has a broad roster, and it's honestly a good thing that characters like Manato have different pros and cons, different combos, and different timings, because it helps them all feel unique. As for the origin of the term, it comes from fighting games where some moves have long recovery times or may put you in a vulnerable position, and by canceling into a different action, like a dodge, you can bypass that problem altogether. You get around the problem by canceling it. ZZZ isn't a fighting game, but it is undeniably built by fighting game fans, and thus has inherited some of the DNA. Lucia Elowen. Slot support. Keywords support, aftershock, ether veil. I didn't end up with Lucia, and haven't really figured out any quirks after a few Hollow Zero runs, so this is going to be a little bare bones. The details for Lucia's skill are a bit of a mess to read through, but the shortest answer is that she'll maintain the differences between Harmony and Whim attacks all on her own, and the buffs have plenty of duration to them. So for a simple description, Lucia's support buffs are split across two different triggers. The first, which is a sheer damage buff, and a crit damage buff with her additional, she'll trigger with any Harmony attack. Your first will more than likely be after using her EX special, like any other support. The second buff is from her Dream Gauge. Once full, she'll enter Dream State, activating her Ether Veil. While in the Dream State, she can trigger an Aftershock every 8 seconds, and her normal Whim attacks, these are just attacks outside Dream State, will be upgraded to Harmony attacks, consuming the Dream Gauge. These attacks will also add a team-wide damage buff. I don't think you really need to sweat the Dream Gauge much, since pretty much all of Lucia's attacks fill the Dream Gauge when she's not in the Dream State. You'll just need to actually use her Assist, EX Special, or Ultimate now and again. The only trick I know of is that you can follow up her EX Special with the end of her basic combo, which will either be a boost to filling the gauge or just relatively free bonus damage. Another important detail for Lucia is that her Sheer Force buff, as well as the damage of her Dream State attacks, scale off of her HP, so you'll want to build Lucia with HP instead of attack, like the Rupture agents that she supports. The last quirk I know of for Lucia is that her EX Special does not trigger a Quick Assist, like how most supports work. Instead, Lucia triggers a Quick Assist anytime she enters Dream State, which will often occur with an EX Special since it does fill a chunk of the gauge, so you may not actually notice, at least until you swap from her expecting a character to enter with a Quick Assist and they just walk on instead. This doesn't really throw a huge wrench into gameplay, though I suspect Astral Voice maybe isn't a good disc choice for her. That's pretty much all I know. I think she might be one of the strongest support agents in terms of off-field damage, but I don't have her, so I don't know how much her HP scaling Harmony boosts actually contribute to the team's damage. That said, she's currently the only dedicated Rupture support, so she doesn't exactly have a lot of competition in that area. She's also got both the Aftershock and Ether Veil keywords, so she can also be useful just from being able to trigger a variety of buffs. Oh, and you can also drive around her ultimate, but I haven't found any practical use for that. Yidhari Murphy. Slot, on-field. Keywords, Sheer Force, Ether Veil. Yidhari is a lot of fun to play and has a great counter gimmick, but man, let me tell you, if you lack any and all patience, it can be a challenge to use her well. But the basics are actually simple. First up, her core skill is that Yidhari's damage increases as her health decreases, the bonus maxing out when she's at or below 50%. Losing health is incredibly simple, since she'll rapidly drain it when you charge her basic attack by holding the basic attack button. You can move during this charge, so feel free to reposition as needed. There are 3 charge levels, and it's actually a bit slow to get to the 3rd state. You want to get to the 3rd state, since not only does this lead to a stronger attack, but at level 3, when you release the basic attack button, Yidhari will do a spin attack for several seconds. This spin can be useful for grouping small mobs, as it will suck them in, but the primary use is not damage, but instead giving your foes time to attack you. Because aside from the damage boost at low health, Yidhari's true gimmick is that when attacked while charging or spinning, Yidhari will block the attack, and you can then counter with an EX special that is significantly stronger than her regular EX special. It's almost as strong as her ultimate, and you can trigger it much more frequently, ideally. Doing this also refunds 15 energy, which really just further emphasizes why you should always rely on this EX special instead of her non-counter version. You can also follow up this attack with a basic attack, where she'll use the last hit of her basic combo for more damage and some healing. The healing is important since the other quirk of Yidhari is that she generates fewer decibels from her actions. Making up for this, she rapidly generates decibels when draining her health. This is the mechanic that makes healing important to her, instead of just staying at low health the whole time. If you don't heal her up, she's going to generate a lot less decibels. Conveniently, Yidhari is capable of healing large chunks of her own health, with the final hit of her basic attack combo, as well as her EX special attacks. That's actually a detail you'll want to remember, since if you're not burning your health after healing, you might be above 50% for subsequent attacks, like an ultimate, and then you're weakening or removing your damage buffs. Speaking of, using Yidhari's ultimate is when she activates her Ether Veil, which aside from a small health buff, also allows her to charge her basic attack faster. Yidhari also strongly benefits from a stun teammate, since aside from any DPS loving a stun modifier, Yidhari can use a regular special attack while charging to trigger her strong counter hit against a stunned enemy. You can also trigger this attack by pressing the dodge button, which is possibly more comfortable when using a controller. So where my patience problem comes in is making sure I always charge to level 3, since you won't be able to counter any incoming attack if you start attacking at level 2. You also, maybe, have to fight the urge to use her regular EX special, which while it is a piercing ranged attack and does heal you, is much weaker than the counter EX special. Of course, if you miss too many counters, or you're about to break a miasma shield, maybe you do want to use it just to prevent your energy from being wasted. My other patience problem, and I'm sure this is just a perception issue and not the devs actually trolling, but I swear to God, enemies will just stand there and stare at you when you're ready to counter them, refusing to attack you. Enemies like Wandering Hunter and Hator will combo the heck out of me when I run any other team. But anytime I'm playing Yidhari, I swear all they do is spray miasma in the air and loom menacingly at me. Again, I think this is more of a me problem than a dev problem, but consider yourself warned. When all you want the enemies to do is hit you, they still get to act on their own time. Maybe you can squeeze in a basic attack combo before their next swing, or maybe doing that will just screw up the counter. Trivia. So, Spook Shack is our least factional faction so far, in terms of unity of design. This seems intentional to me, since they are just internet friends. When we meet them in the story, aside from Yuzuha and Manato, who grew up together, they're all meeting IRL for the first time. So the fact that they aren't coordinating their outfits doesn't really bother me. But I bring that up because I do think that the members of Spook Shack all share a unifying theme. They are all untrusted. Alice is the young heiress of a rich and powerful corporation, but she's not sure she's ready for the responsibility of being in charge, and so the sharks are circling because her company's rivals assume she's not ready either. We see this during the flashback with Damien the night she arrives in Waifei Peninsula. Yuzuha is an impish prankster. There's no malice involved, she's not actually trying to hurt anyone, but should you trust her? No, you should not. She is actively looking for any sign of gullibility that she can use for her own amusement. Manato is untrusted because he's just naturally intimidating. He's frickin' huge. Add in his streetwear, and people's first impression is that he's some criminal bruiser. On top of that, some people get really freaked out around big dogs like mastiffs, and I don't think it's a coincidence that Manato is a dog thyran. He'd literally take a bullet for you, but it's perfectly normal to be a little wary if he was just a stranger you met in a dark alley. Lucia is a Night Watcher. In a world ravaged by hollows, people easily distrust and gain contempt for individuals that are for some reason ignored by most ethereals. Her overt love for studying those ethereals also isn't doing her any favors. Add on her people's flipped sleep schedules, where they nap during the day but stay up all night, when any honest individual would be asleep, and it's not really surprising that there's some distrust involved. And finally we have Yidhari. I've covered this in previous videos, but Yidhari worked as a proxy, and proxies are people who work as guides within hollows. She's also able to see visions of the past while within a hollow because of the experimental drugs she was given. But to those that follow her, she's just hallucinating. Should you trust a guide that actively hallucinates? No, you should probably find a different guide. Even Yidhari was assuming that those visions were going to be the death of her, so it's certainly hard to blame strangers not trusting her as a guide either. So there we go. No unified fashion, but Spook Shack members do all share a unifying theme. And a bonus, just for kicks, since we also frequent the Internat and met them in person at the same time, Phaethon is certainly also a fully qualified member of the Spook Shack faction. And as unsanctioned proxies, educated at Helios Academy under Carol Arna, the person blamed for the Hollow Zero disaster, we assume the general public won't trust us either. Obel Squad. Seed. Slot. Versatile. Keywords. On-field DPS and support. I don't have anything advanced to say about Seed, because I've only had her for like a week at this point in the script. Still, despite taking me more than 200 polls, I did manage to get her. Which is good for this video, since she and Orphie are currently the only agents from this season that aren't playable in Hollow Zero. This section would be even more bare bones if I hadn't had a chance to play her outside of the story. Seed's core gimmick is that she's a dedicated attack support that only works with a second attack agent on the team. Whenever Seed or her partner attacks, they grant an attack, crit damage, and general damage buff to the other partner. These buffs start active, and with a 40-second duration, you really don't need to worry about these buffs wearing off. Another important detail of these buffs is that they do not work off-field, disabling 3 seconds after tagging out. With many attack agents, I don't think this is too big a deal, but it is a factor worth knowing, since you'll get more damage out of a partner like Orphie or Cissia, who have off-field mechanics, if you factor this into how you play them instead of just only relying on on-field damage. As for Seed's combat mechanics, she is a gauge that fills up as she attacks, uses her EX special, her ultimate, or when her partner uses energy. When her gauge is full enough, Seed can access a powerful pair of basic attacks. Seed has 2 ways to triggering those attacks, both done by just holding down the basic attack button. The first, a lunging punch from Seed Senior, requires that she first reach the end of her basic combo, or to have triggered an assist follow-up, or a quick assist, or to have fully channeled her EX special. These are required precursors, you can't just hold the basic attack button to get the punch. If you try to do that, Seed won't do anything, and you'll just feel foolish, speaking from experience. After the lunge, if Seed has the required points, and you keep holding basic attack, she'll use 2 powerful attacks back to back. The second way to access that pair of attacks is after an ultimate, again if Seed has the required points in her gauge. Seed's EX special is a channeled attack during which she can strafe around the enemy, is invulnerable, and drains up to 60 energy for 60 steel charge in exchange. If fully channeled, as mentioned before, she'll lead into the lunging punch. So aside from her EX special and ultimate, the primary way to fill up Seed's gauge is to swap in her partner, as Seed gains half a point of her gauge for every point of energy her partner spends. Ideally, you'll figure out a reliable sequence of switching between her and her partner while managing whatever related buffs her partner has, as Seed's are self-managing. Seed's additional ability, which, let's be honest, you'll always have, since it's her entire gimmick, not only buffs the damage of her core combo, but also makes it so that Seed's attacks generate energy for her partner. This is appreciated by any character in the game, but for me, the 2 characters that gain the most are Orphie, she's next, and Anton. You'll still need some really good discs if you want to use Anton for clearing endgame content. Mine can't yet. But I do think that Seed is probably his best partner, since she feeds him energy, and he naturally wants to tag out for a few seconds after exhausting his signature buff. Magus and Orphie Magnuson. Slot, versatile. Keywords, off-field DPS, aftershock, support. I can't help myself, so I'm just gonna be cheeky out front. How to play Orphie. Whenever you think it's relevant, and it's available, use either her Heat Charge attack or ultimate, and then Quick Assist out. Otherwise, you can pretty much ignore her. Orphie will bring a surprising amount of DPS without any input from you at all. Some may consider this a bad thing, but it doesn't change the truth. She was designed as an off-field DPS, and by God does she do that. So for actual character details, her core buff is triggered when you hold down the special attack button to use a fully charged gauge. The zeroed in buff gives the whole team an attack power buff based on Orphie's energy regen, up to 700 at max. This is a pretty short buff, only lasting 12 seconds, though characters that use aftershock attacks can extend this, on themselves, up to 20 seconds. Orphie will refill 20% of the gauge after any EX special, off-field aftershock, chain attack, or ultimate. This is a better buff if you're making an aftershock team, but I would not get too hung up on that. The most important character that Orphie buffs is herself, since just about every single one of her attacks counts as an aftershock attack, on-field or off. I've labeled her versatile, but the most natural slot to run her is in the support slot. She has a standard quick assist from her Heat Charge and ultimate, and she really does make up for lost team buffs with her own damage. Her additional ability is triggered by stun or support, which chances are pretty good are specializations that will allow you to enable the additional ability of whatever rupture or attack agent you pair her with. Her and Lighter have been joined at the hip since I pulled her. Now, leaning more into the less meta side of things, Orphie does have some on-field potential. Orphie has 2 aftershock attacks, and which one she uses depends on whether she has at least 60 energy when the aftershock is ready, every 5 seconds. If she does have 60 energy, she'll consume 30 and do a stronger attack. It's effectively an off-field EX special. It's also much stronger than Orphie's normal EX special, kind of discouraging you from ever using that. The faster she replaces 30 energy and gets back to at least 60, the more frequently she'll use this stronger attack, which helps her benefit from building up energy regen for her buff. So where this ties into on-field potential is that, as we should all know by now, characters also build up energy while attacking on-field. You can build back up to 60 energy much faster using Orphie on-field than if you just ignore her. And while she has no way to trigger that souped-up aftershock attack without swapping out, as long as it's been 5 seconds since Orphie's last aftershock, she will immediately trigger another the next time an ally swaps in. Put all that together, and you end up with a cheap and powerful EX special attack that you can only trigger by swapping characters. Once that attack finishes, if you then swap back to Orphie and recharge her energy, she can pretty much use that stronger EX special every 5 seconds, which is a lot more often than she will with passive energy regen alone. So while I don't think this is anything new for the meta, if you do want to run Orphie on field, actually play her, there is a space for that, and it's a sorta unique, swap-dependent style to boot. Trivia. I think it's fair to say that neither Seed nor Orphie ended up being what we expected when we saw them teased. A bit of a bait and switch from the devs, and I certainly can't blame you for being disappointed if you already built up an image in your head of what they would be like. But I bring that up now just to show my appreciation for the Orphie and Magus pair. If you somehow didn't figure it out by playing through their chapter, Magus is the character. Orphie's just a sidekick. Magus is a copy of Orpheus's mind, who was the real character, wounded during the Hollow Zero disaster while serving under Isolde. Orphie is effectively just Magus's apprentice. This is all reinforced in the combat animations too, where Orphie is kind of just along for the ride. That's not her being clumsy, that's her trying to fight while literally being dragged around by her own tail. You find out through one of their trust events that the military isn't completely insane, and that Plan A was just to clone Orpheus's body and move Orpheus into the new shell. That seems pretty reasonable to me. What went wrong is that sometime before or during the transfer, Orpheus discovers that the clone isn't empty. Orphie is already a resident, and Orpheus is adamantly opposed to evicting the current tenant. Now, how we got from that to a robotic copy of Orpheus's mind and a tail gun? I do not have an answer for that. Something definitely went off the rails after Plan A. Anyway, there's a minor line in the 2.2 story where Orphie mentions she was a terrible student, which makes me think that they tried to let Orphie live a normal life, and things just didn't work out, and she found her way back to the military anyway. Which I think makes Magus a really sympathetic character. Despite being this rage-fueled copy, she's also taken responsibility for this life that she sort of had a hand in creating, where she's trying to legitimately help Orphie become the best soldier she can be. But Magus also feels guilty over Orphie being in this situation in the first place. For example, circling back to the student thing, we can see that Orpheus was likely a bad student too. It's a bit tragic, but Magus feels responsibility for Orphie's life path, almost as if Orphie's cloned body is forcing her to follow in Orpheus's exact footsteps. We end up with a senior officer training a recruit, while at the same time acting as a mother or big sister raising an only child, in their own image, all wrapped up with rage, PTSD, and crushing guilt. I really like the dynamic between them, even if Orphie wasn't what I expected her to be. Another detail I want to bring up is one that I think softens Obel Squad not quite meeting up with expectations. Obel Squad is not equivalent to what you may know as Special Forces. They are not a super elite unit. They are not the best of the best. Obel Squad is more like Magus's home for wayward science projects. Not to undercut the agents of Obel Squad, I love them all, just as a statement of fact, Obel Squad doesn't look or act like an ultra-elite military unit because it's simply not what they are. Their whatever madness led to the creation of a gun-tail robot attached to a clone and put it in charge. A blind sniper, a dangerous science project adopted by a dying robot, and the last remnant of a failed artificial human weapon project. I can't remember where I read it, I think it was another of Orphie's Trust events, but Obel Squad wasn't even formally formed until Soldier 11 had joined, and she was the last one to join. Before then, I don't have a clue what their actual jobs were in terms of military function. Despite all of that, they still kick butt and get the job done. The key is that I think it's important to appreciate what they are instead of what you maybe think they're failing to be. And Soldier 11 had her own dedicated side story and was a core part of Soldier Zero's side story, so it's not the worst thing that she didn't get to feature during the Season 2 Obel Squad story, which was really just Magus and Orphie's story anyway. And because I just can't help myself, let's also say a thing about Seed Sr. If you follow this channel, you have certainly heard me repeat a theory that I still haven't given up on. Sorry to bring that up, yet again, but I wanted to share some humility. When I laid out my reasons that I was sticking with my belief, even after playing through Flora's side story, I said that I think the theme for Obel Squad is more than a weapon. And I kid you not, it did not occur to me, when I wrote that, to point out that Flora is using her papa's corpse as a weapon. It's incredibly morbid if you stop and think about it. Since I still think it's plausible that this is the theme the devs used when designing this faction, maybe that explains why I haven't given up hope yet. If each faction does always have a unifying theme, and Obel Squad's is more than a weapon, there is currently a glaring flaw, one that really needs to be corrected. But it's the devs' game, they have their own plans, and they're under no obligation to follow my preferred timetable. We'll just have to wait and see. Krampus Compliance Authority. Dialyn. Slot, versatile. Keywords, stun, support, bodyguard. Nekomata stole her from me, so I don't know a lot of details, but I do know she's one, if not the, most meta pick from Season 2, so I think it's safe to assume that what she does do works incredibly well. Getting the biggest thing out of the way first, Dialyn has a gauge that slowly fills when she's on field, and fills faster when she uses her EX special attacks. During the chain attack window, if her gauge has enough points when she uses a chain attack, quick assist, or a charged basic, more later, she'll spend a portion of her gauge and cause the swapping agent to use their ultimate instead of a chain attack without using any decibels. This alone is pretty much what makes her one of the most meta picks this season, since duplicating your strongest attack during the stun window is never a bad thing, let alone when it's coming from a stun agent that also buffs stun damage. As to that charged basic, Dialyn also gains a customer complaint point when she fills her gauge, and if she doesn't already have one, after using her ultimate. This point allows her to trigger said charged basic, which is technically an EX special attack, which is good damage. However, if Dialyn has a full gauge, she'll spend it all to immediately trigger a single chain attack window, which really just lets you decide which teammate is about to use a free ultimate. This method doesn't require the enemy to already be stunned, but costs 30 more points of her gauge, versus the stun window version. Since the frequency of Dialyn's free ultimates are only limited by how often you can reach 90 on the gauge, that cost difference might be relevant since she's not limited to something like once a stun window, though not having really put it to work, I can't say. Anyway, without a full gauge, this charged basic is still a strong attack and procs a reverse quick assist. You'll definitely want to spend it if you're about to generate a new one. The only other quirk I'm aware of is that she has a 3-part EX special, each part only taking 25 energy. Each triggers in sequence and is stronger than the previous, so I imagine it's a good idea to wait until you have the required 75 energy so you can reach the third and strongest one. There is an 8-second window between each where you can still trigger the next stronger one, and to fill that window, her description shows a separate basic combo that is available after an EX special, so maybe the ideal is to add a couple of basic attacks between each EX special attack. I haven't gotten a good feel for those alternate basic attacks from my Hollow Zero testing, so maybe someone in the comments can give more details about that. I don't really know how much field time you should give her, but her kit includes a variety of damage buffs to her own skills, and she scales her impact with crit rate, so she effectively builds like an on-field DPS, but maybe she works more like a burst DPS in practice. I've only been able to use her in Hollow Zero, where currently stun feels really weak, so I haven't been too impressed by how quickly she can stun, but considering how widely she features in the current meta, I'm also pretty sure that the current Hollow Zero is tipping the scales heavily there. Additional note, I found it super awkward to mix in Dialyn's extra ultimate during the chain attack window, and a big factor for that is that I still haven't changed to using manual chain attacks. If you actively want to get better at combat, it's been widely recommended that you switch to using those, and I think that goes double if you pull Dialyn. Banyue. Slot on field. Keywords, sheer force. Banyue eluded me due to his shortened banner. I don't hold this against the devs, since it would have been financially irresponsible to have your Void Hunter climax miss the critical Xmas New Year's spending window. The financial calendar rules overall. Anyway, I do still wish I had managed to pull him, since he does have a really awesome design and mechanics. He is one of the most fast-paced and rewarding agents to learn to play, and like Yixuan, he also feels fantastic to run solo. Despite not pulling him, I did take the time to run him through Hollow Zero a few times so I could at least do him some justice in this video. The biggest thing I can say up front is that if you want to play Banyue, then you've got homework. As I will hopefully show, he's not as complex as his full move list may make it seem. But you are 100% going to want to take him into the training room and or Hollow Zero and actually deliberately practice his moves. Banyue is not strong enough for button mashing to carry you. So let's start with the basics. Banyue has 2 different basic attack chains. One with the basic attack button, and one with the special attack button. This is very simple, but also very important to grasp. Mix up which chain you're using, and you won't know what Banyue is going to do next. You don't really need to learn the animations of each step or each combo by heart. The keys are just to be aware of what button you're pressing, keep pressing the same button, for now, and be able to count to 4. Once you've managed to grasp the basic combos, we have to answer an obvious question. If both buttons are basic attack strings, how do you do an EX special attack? The answer is easy. Provided you have the required energy, just change buttons. Basic attack followed by special, that's an EX special attack. Special followed by basic, that's a different EX special attack. Basic, basic, basic followed by special, another completely different EX special attack. Altogether, Banyue has 4 different EX special attacks. If you follow the simple rule of change button to EX special, all that really matters is the count. After the first or second attack of a basic combo, you get 1 EX special attack. After 3 or 4 attacks of a basic combo, you get a different, stronger EX special attack. There's an EX special in the first 2 hits, there's a different, stronger one in the last 2 hits. That, hopefully, is very digestible. Now, the 2 early ones, before the 3rd hit, are weaker, and so I don't think they should be a standard part of your kit. Especially because these attacks aren't exactly wasted. There is a stronger version of each of those 2 early attacks, called a Wrath version, that you can trigger during the 3 and 4 hit EX specials. To do that, all you need to do is repeat the same button you used to trigger the first EX special twice, and then change back to the other button. I know this is getting more complex, but I promise this is as deep as I will go. There's more depth beyond this that I don't even know myself, so let's just take this final leap, and we can leave mastering manual input moves to the meta players. This follow-up combo is technically one of those manual inputs, but the input quite generously, and no doubt intentionally, matches our simple rule. Don't change buttons until the EX special. For example, basic special to trigger an Earthshaker. Then, during that attack, we press special and basic, and we'll trigger Mountain Tremor Wrath. You don't want to rush that input too fast, since you will cancel into the new move when you successfully input the 3rd button. That will mean canceling damage from the first EX special. The manual input attack will trigger on the final button press, so again, just remember, to trigger the EX special, we switch buttons. Figure this out, and congratulations, you've mastered the easiest version of manual inputs. You're now just as good as I am. Altogether, that makes our standard combo 1-1-1-2, 2-2-1, or vice versa, where 1 and 2 are just basic attack or special attack. Are there any major differences between the 2 sets of EX specials? Yes. I think the special attack chain, which includes the orb attack and the roar, has a little more AoE but does less damage, whereas the basic attack version is more single target focused but stronger. But ask a professional if you want a clear answer. Regardless, if you were intimidated by Banyue before, I hope I've made him a lot more approachable. He really is just as simple as picking a button, sticking with it, and only switching buttons when you're ready to EX special. The next detail I need to cover is Banyue's gauge. He fills this gauge, his Wrathful Fires, by spending energy. He also gains some gauge after using a defensive assist, a successful dodge, or by blocking an attack. To block, press the dodge button without moving. If timed with an enemy's attack, Banyue will absorb the hit, take no damage, and you can follow up with one of the stronger EX specials by holding either basic attack or special attack. Doing this is flashy, feels great, and also nets you a little extra gauge too. Once you've filled the gauge enough, you can activate Banyue's Visage of Wrath state. Do this by holding down the basic attack button, and he will have an entry skill where he changes forms and gains 4 Mountain's Might points. Super important note here, Banyue will also automatically enter this state from a chain attack or ultimate if he has enough gauge. I say this is super important since it's not as obvious when that happens as when you do it manually, and holding down basic attack while you're already in the Visage of Wrath state will end it, wasting your Mountain's Might points. I have done this a lot. You should not do that. And the reason you don't want to waste those points is that each one lets you use an EX special attack for free and also refunds you 10 energy on top of that. Now, if you're lazy, the devs have added an easy button, where if you hold down special attack in this state, Banyue will automatically cycle through each of his EX special attacks, in sequence, and then trigger the finisher. Unfortunately, there is a bit of a price to pay for taking the easy way. If you instead manually input at least 2 EX special attacks, but ideally all 4, because if you can combo once, then you can surely combo twice. Then, when triggering the finisher, Banyue will add an extra attack where he shoots out his orbs just before the wall crush. This is a healthy chunk of free damage, and you throw that away if you rely on the easy button. I also think Banyue's additional ability has this same manual requirement, i.e. you don't get that fire buff if you use the easy button. As for the rest of Banyue's core skill, he has a variety of different damage buffs that are all enabled by using his EX special attacks. Even button mashing, you will pull off Banyue's EX special attacks, so you don't really need to worry about managing those buffs. You will have them active all of the time. Just don't forget to F your agents. I absolutely believe it is worth your time to go into Hollow Zero and learn how to play Banyue solo, if you've not done so already. Honestly, and this is just commentary, not an actual prediction, but I think the devs should just give him out for free. To everyone. Since his design steers you towards learning how to play the game better. I believe the entire player base would benefit from having Banyue on their account. He is a well-designed character and very rewarding to play, let alone master. If any of that interests you, and you can win a 50-50, please don't let worries about the meta prevent you from picking him up on rerun and having fun. If he ever reruns. Zhao. Slot, versatile. Keywords, support, Ether Veil, bodyguard. Our free climax agent, releasing alongside Ye Shunguang, Zhao, like Pan Yinhu, is a defense agent that mostly provides support and heals instead of having a shield. I consider Zhao to be somewhat similar to Manato in that she's a good agent, but there are parts of her design that I bump against and need to work around. The basics are pretty simple. Zhao has a gauge that starts out full. Once the gauge is full, either by swapping her in to trigger an entry skill, which we'll soon discover is the preferred method, or by using a charged basic attack, an EX special attack, a chain attack, or an ultimate, Zhao will trigger her Ether Veil, and also trigger a separate attack power buff for the whole team. That attack buff lasts 50 seconds, so you won't struggle to maintain it. Sticking with her support effects, Zhao's additional ability provides an additional team damage buff while in any Ether Veil. It doesn't matter if hers gets overridden, which increases up to 40% based on Zhao's initial HP. Like Lucia, Zhao is another HP scaling, non-rupture character. One way she makes use of this extra health is that once every 30 seconds, Zhao's EX special will consume a portion of her current health to heal the entire team over 5 seconds. She also uses her HP to boost the damage of her charged basic attack, but it's a small percentage of her max health, so this doesn't actually add up to much additional damage. I'm not saying free damage is free damage here, since, speaking of that charged basic attack, that's the first place I get caught off guard by Zhao. If you switch off of Zhao while charging it, or after one of her various quick assists, Zhao will fully charge this attack while off-field. And what makes this not quite free damage is that Zhao will prioritize completing that full charge, which takes 5 seconds, over using a defensive assist. Zhao has the bodyguard trait, but frequently channels an attack that makes her unavailable for defensive assists. And you can bump into that frequently since while in Ether Veil, Zhao triggers a quick assist with many of her actions. Still, you definitely benefit from frequently swapping to her, proccing a quick assist, and quick swapping out, and it's pretty easy to maintain the Astral Voice buff with Zhao. You even benefit a little by just swapping to her, starting the charge manually, and swapping out. But anytime Zhao is charging, you can't rely on her to catch any of your defensive assists. It's not the biggest problem, but it's definitely something I've encountered in the heat of the moment. The next thing that's worth considering, though maybe you don't technically bump against it as you just miss out on it entirely, is Zhao's entry skill. Using this entry skill is super easy at the start of a fight since the gauge starts full. Just swap to Zhao. Not only does this attack do solid damage, but it also triggers a quick assist so it doesn't eat up your time either. The issue comes when you're refilling the gauge. The teammate generation is a little slow, so your biggest gains will come when you use Zhao's EX special, a chain attack, or her ultimate. But those skills will also immediately proc Zhao's Ether Veil when used, spending the gauge. No gauge means no entry skill. Zhao can only use her entry skill by swapping in with a full gauge. This means that the only way to ever trigger that extra attack after the start of the fight is if you make sure she only tops off the gauge while off-field. To get more value out of Zhao, you want to avoid ever capping off her gauge with an attack, and at least in my case, I'm just not paying enough attention to plan for that. I tend to just see an EX special or ultimate that's available and immediately decide that now is a good time to use it, proccing Ether Veil and skipping the entry skill. Again, not the biggest problem, but it's a source of cheap additional damage that I frequently miss out on. Honestly, the most common nuisance I've run into with Zhao is that I often try and run her with Yidhari, but I'd need a support agent to enable both of their additional abilities, and the only really good option in that team is Lucia, who I don't have. Astra or even Sokaku are technically fine, better than nothing, but like Zhao, their attack buff is watered down for Rupture agents, and doubling up on that just doesn't make for a strong team. That said, she's very versatile for non-Rupture, hyper-carry teams, and also an easy way for those same teams to enable an Ether Veil buff. Swap to her more, make use of her Veiled Quick Assists, and maybe don't depend on her defensive assists, and try to use her entry skill more often, and you will get some extra value out of her. Promeia. Slot, versatile. Keywords, anomaly DPS, a bloom. I literally just finished the new chapter when writing this, so I'm not really going to try to explain her mechanics. I haven't figured them out yet. She's a big fan of blooms. On top of her gauge points, which she spends by using a charged basic attack after certain attacks, she also triggers a blooms with her chain attack and her ultimate. Her anomaly mastery above a threshold also buffs her anomaly proficiency and her team's bloom damage. So, other than figuring out how to effectively fill her gauge and trigger her blooms on command, she's an anomaly agent that does standard anomaly things. I imagine you won't have a problem putting her onto a team. Trivia. What's the Krampus theme? A popular idea I've seen is that they're circus-themed. You've got Dialyn's acrobatics and rings, Banyue's a lion, and you can easily see Promeia as an escape artist. Yet the only answer I've heard for Zhao is that she's a rabbit and magicians pull rabbits out of hats, which I don't think really works. Do circuses even have magicians? I always imagine the hat trick is a stage thing. Zhao and Promeia do both have clear moon links, but I don't know anything that would tie the moon to Banyue or Dialyn. So I still don't hate my two-faced idea, which I think still holds up, though not in the ways I originally guessed. Two-sided may be more accurate, to avoid the overt negative connotations of being two-faced. I still stand by my original pass on Dialyn's design. I'm not going to repeat that here. It's at the end of my defense roll video if you're curious. That breakdown was written before her chapter was ready, so I can now add the duality of Dialyn being a customer support agent, required to maintain a positive attitude as she takes customer complaints, with her also being an agent of vengeance for those voices she hears within the hollows. The smile for her day job is just a mask, a requirement for those precious positive reviews. The mask falls for her special customers, where she gets to address their problems, personally. Banyue, I actually want to talk about in a separate section. Suffice it to say that having the ability to change form is technically true, but not that important. He's got a much bigger dual nature issue to resolve. Zhao is almost what I expected, but in a completely different way. The helpful bunny wasn't exactly an act or a front, but more of a not quite the whole truth. The ruthlessness I was expecting isn't being hidden, it just has to be warranted. As long as everyone is getting what they want, a fair deal, she is a perfectly chill bunny. So the first side is what she presents herself as, what she works hard to be seen as. She is a talented, charismatic bunny with good business sense, committed to maintaining and improving her reputation, completing her jobs with high marks, and who won't hesitate to fillet someone if they cheat or steal. As for her second side, the part I wasn't expecting, it's that she's actually just a cute little bunny, and she's always a little scared that she'll make a mistake and end up abandoned again. Everything she currently is something she worked hard to become because as a child the people around her decided that no one actually needed what she was. The meat-eating bunny is always working hard towards living up to her hard-earned reputation until she can be all alone and just enjoy a salad. For Promeia, while I did finish the 2.0 story before writing this, I still don't have a real clue. Based on a single sentence from the end of that chapter, I'm fairly confident that we'll learn more about her in Season 3. I don't think the devs are just skipping her backstory. For now, based on her teaser, it seems likely that one job went too far, and now she's trying to atone for past atrocities. But that doesn't give me anything really two-sided to work with. I did come up with a guess, though. Emphasis on guess. What if prior to the life-changing event, Promeia really, and I mean really, enjoyed her work? Imagine a comic where her hands are dripping in blood, not unlike what we've already seen, but then cuts to her face where she's got a massive smile. That could explain why she shackles herself. Promeia might be literally holding herself back, with emphasis on her hands, to keep a sadistic tendency in check. But that's still just a wild guess. We'll have to wait and see. And just to shoehorn in one more, I'm definitely getting a two-sided vibe from the still mysterious Krampus boss. She has her own seat at the top's high table, and so she should not be fully trusted. But based on the interactions we see with Zhao and Promeia, she also seems to care about those agents' futures. She's likely a backstabbing corporate cutthroat with her own goals for tops, but she's also taken a vested interest in her subordinates. So back to Banyue, I'm a big fan of his design, his arc in 2.4, and even more so after they posted his EP. A huge contributing factor to that is my likely very incorrect and extremely limited understanding of the Buddhist path to enlightenment, prajna. My incredibly ignorant understanding of this is 3 key points. Abandoning worldly desires, not wanting anything or taking anything more than the absolute minimum you need. Accepting pain and suffering, not seeking it but not avoiding it. And wisdom. Putting those together, we can ask, is Banyue already enlightened? And I certainly don't think so. Wisdom feels like a real stretch to me, since while Banyue can offer sage-like advice, he's also often a bit thick. He's not stupid, but there's no shortage of things he still needs to learn. That's the primary path I see him on. So it's the other two that we can blend together into Banyue's duality. He doesn't seem to have any of his own wants. We never see him shirk from pain or punishment. He is aware that his actions led to others being harmed. He is not concerned with improving his standing, and he never makes any attempt to excuse those actions or escape punishment for them. This is all why I said in my Agent Agency video that I don't think Banyue felt guilt for his past actions. Banyue isn't trying to change anyone's mind, let alone his own. I think I said this in that same video, but if you think Banyue owes you a pound of flesh, and he has any reason to think you might deserve it, I believe he won't hesitate to give it to you. So the questions we should really ask are, does he do this because he's selfless, on the path, or does he do this because he's soulless, just a machine running cold logic? This is certainly not a new idea. We've all likely seen the robot monk thing before, for example Zenyatta in Overwatch, which plays with the idea of a robot inherently being selfless. But in New Eridu, we never really see this sense of self being questioned for constructs. All of the other constructs we've met seem to have a very strong sense of self. In fact, we've seen the forbidden fruit test referenced more as a tool of oppression than as a way of proving existence. Banyue is the only construct that comes to my mind when I think of a robot questioning their existence, which nicely reinforces his characterization as a monk. So just focusing on Banyue, I think the devs did a really good job in Chapter 2.4 of using show don't tell to convey this internal conflict, this existential question, which ironically they do by not really showing or telling us anything. Aside from one instance, which I'll bring up in a moment, we never actually see or hear Banyue question his choices or his own nature. His feelings are always just implied by the actions of those around him and his stoic response. Yet is he stoic, or is he just an empty shell that physically isn't capable of carrying? As for that one instance, that occurs in that same chapter and happens before the Sobek fight, when we see Banyue being consumed by a cloud of miasma. This is followed by a comic showing Banyue meditating while we hear him debating with himself. That voice would seem to contradict what I just said about us never hearing Banyue question himself. But the reason I don't think that contradicts my point is that I am fairly confident that the words we hear in that moment, in Banyue's voice, are actually the creator's. I don't think the Season 2 story ever actually declares this, but I'm fairly confident that the voices characters keep hearing in their heads, all throughout the 2.0 story, but especially in Ye Shunguang's arc, are almost always the voice of the creator. Miasma can literally read your mind and also allows the creator to speak to you, and so the creator has always been present, toying with everyone over the Season 2 chapters. And that voice being the creator is important, because if we were hearing Banyue actually question himself, simply the act of asking that question would immediately imply a sense of self. But if this is the creator's voice, then we never actually hear Banyue's own thoughts. We never actually see Banyue react. This lack of any action, any response from Banyue, is what lets us see that core conflict. Selfless or soulless. We may not get a fair share of male characters, but I think the devs have always put an equal, if not greater, amount of effort into developing the ones we get. Angels of Delusion. Sunna. Slot support. Keywords support and Ether Veil. Sunna is a solid attack support agent without any super crazy buffs. She's got the traditional team attack buff, which lasts 40 seconds, so there's no real need to worry about that buff falling off. Her additional ability also adds in a chunk of bonus stun damage, which never hurts. But her core, more unique mechanic is her Cat's Gaze debuff. This debuff, which she'll apply with most of her attacks, including an off-field one, is triggered after one of her attack or anomaly teammates hits the same enemy some number of times. I've never bothered to count. Sunna also generates points when any agents trigger an Ether Veil, when an agent procs an anomaly, or when she uses her ultimate. With these points, anytime a targeted enemy doesn't have the Cat's Gaze debuff, Sunna's little hollow cat bubblegum will consume a point and do an attack for a bit of damage, while also reapplying the buff. Basically, Sunna does some off-field damage. The unique part is that this damage counts as damage from the attack or anomaly teammate that triggers it, which is pretty great since damage from your DPS characters should almost always be better than damage from your supports. In terms of gameplay, Sunna's biggest quirk is that she has a 2-part EX special, and the second part is free. After triggering Sunna's EX special, if you hold the special attack button down, she'll immediately follow up the first EX special with her second. The first applies her attack buff, and the second triggers her Ether Veil. Doing this chain together is how you'll typically start the fight, just to immediately activate both buffs. But you don't have to trigger both attacks together. If you just press the special attack button, don't hold it down, Sunna will only do the first part. This is useful because not only is it faster to do just one attack, instead of 2, but each EX special triggers a quick assist. Since Sunna gets 2 EX specials for the price of 1, she can maintain stacks of Astral Voice without much trouble, as long as you space them apart a little. You're free to use the second attack whenever you want, it doesn't expire. The only restriction is that you can't trigger the first attack again, spend energy, until you've used the second. Because of the split, there's another nice trick you can do if you want to use both attacks but don't want to wait. If you only trigger the first attack, don't hold the special attack button down, then just before you trigger the quick swap, if you press special attack again, you can have Sunna continue with the second attack while you quick swap. You do need to make sure you just press the button for the first attack, since if you hold it down, you won't get the prompt for a quick assist until the second finishes. Additional note, there is an issue with Sunna's EX special attacks, though it is enemy dependent. The actual target of her attack is a small area of the ground, some distance in front of her. Sunna's targeting will account for this, but if the enemy moves around a lot, Sunna can and will completely miss this attack. You'll still get your buffs to trigger Ether Veil, but you won't get any quick assist or the related damage. There's no universal rule I found for avoiding this, you'll just need to be aware of it and get better at predicting attack patterns, or just learn to live with it until you stop screwing up like I do. Still, this can be another reason to split up her EX specials into 2 separate attacks, since the additional time needed to chain the second attack means additional time for the enemy to just move out of the way. You'll have more control over timing of both attacks if you split them up. Aria. Slot, versatile. Keywords, anomaly DPS, a bloom, and Ether Veil. I'm still a bit awkward with Aria, at least when I'm not just spamming a bloom stomps. Her on-field combos are a bit slow for my tastes, especially when all you want to do is chain stomps. Starting with those stomps, which is the primary source of Aria's damage, you'll first need to generate her points of fandom power, which appear as little glow-stick cats on the battlefield too, up to a maximum of 8. Outside of the stun window, your primary source of these points will be a combination of her basic attack combo and special attacks. You can also get bonus points from her additional ability if someone on her team triggers an Ether Veil. That said, I don't think it's super critical to have a separate Ether Veil teammate, since Aria can generate a decent amount of fandom stacks on her own. I would consider an additional Ether Veil teammate just a nice to have, not something her team should always include. Anyway, as for that standard point generation, at the end of her basic attack combo, Aria will do a big jumping downward slash, which generates 1 point, and if you follow that attack up with a regular special attack, you'll generate a second. Repeat this and you'll probably have enough energy for an EX special on the second loop, which generates 2 points, and so by the third loop you're fully capped. You'll spend these points by doing a charged basic attack. There's a slow charge if you do this from idle, but you can skip that delay by using it after the end of her basic combo or most other of Aria's finisher attacks. This charge attack uses 2 points and does a decent amount of damage, but more importantly will trigger an Bloom burst as long as the enemy is affected by an anomaly. We'll cover the stun window in a second, which Aria actually cares about, but for now I would recommend you freely spend these points as they fill up. We'll soon see that Aria can very easily generate full points at the start of stun. The much more important thing to focus on is making sure that the enemy actually has an anomaly affecting them. Early in a fight, or after an invulnerable window, it's pretty common to have stacks of fandom while the enemy is not yet, or no longer, affected by an anomaly. Aria is all about adding a bloom damage, so using fandom points when there's no anomaly is just wasting points. If you look at Aria's core skill, you may notice that a bloom has different multipliers for each element, and this is true for all current bloom characters. At least for Aria, I do not think it's important for you to ever worry about those differences. My primary reason for that, from my experience, is that Aria's wind-up into a bloom attacks tends to quickly proc corruption, meaning that whatever ally's element you were trying to benefit from is going to be almost immediately overwritten instead of being used. There's a similar issue where Aria's bloom damage also scales based on the anomaly mastery value for the related proc. This is again something you could technically lean into, choosing a teammate with high anomaly mastery, but again, I wouldn't worry about it. First, for many characters, like Grace or Piper, they actually have buffed anomaly buildup, which is effectively the same during combat, but means they don't actually have a higher anomaly mastery. Second, once Aria procs corruption, the only anomaly mastery that matters is her own. If you then swap out just to reapply another element, you might just be wasting time you could be using to burn fandom points and a bloom with Aria's own corruption. On top of all that, if you're increasing Aria's own anomaly mastery to improve her bloom corruption damage, then you're also just magnifying the speed at which she'll overwrite any other element at the same time. Maybe at the meta level, relying on an alternate character's anomaly to min-max Aria's bloom damage will matter, but I haven't lost any sleep just sticking with Aria's own corruption procs. Finally, as part of her core skill, Aria's bloom damage is 50% stronger while the target is stunned. Why I don't think you should worry about saving up fandom points for this is because Aria gets 4 points for a chain attack, which you can double chain into full stacks. Alternatively, if you've got an ultimate ready, which you should probably try to do, that will proc an Ether Veil effect, giving you an additional 4 fandom points, assuming you have her additional ability. On top of that, Aria's ultimate also gives her 3 free stomps, which, since they don't use fandom points, allows you to stack up to 7 stomps, which doesn't include any additional points you can generate from unused energy. Hopefully you can see why I don't think there's much need to avoid spending points before you trigger stun. Once the enemy is stunned and you've piled up your points, stomp your heart out during the stun window and Aria does plenty of damage. Her additional ability makes it easy to make a team with her, especially since her relatively fast point generation and imbued damage mean you don't need to pair her with another anomaly agent for disorders. Hypercarry Aria works just fine. Additional note. I'll mention this again when I finally get to unlock potentials, but just because it's a recent change, and likely made for this exact purpose, Lycon was updated to allow his additional ability to be active when paired with an anomaly agent, and he now also buffs non-ice damage for his team. So he's a relatively easy to access stun agent that you can pair with Aria to good effect. They enable the additional ability for each other, so you just need to choose an anomaly or support agent that works with one of them to complete a great team. Nangong Yu. Slot, wildcard. Keywords, stun, anomaly DPS, a bloom, Ether Veil, Disorder, and Bodyguard. I lost my 50-50 to Nangong, I think it was Nekomata again, and let me tell you, parsing through her core skill and additional ability so I could write about her really just made me want to skip this. There is so much text in her descriptions. As usual, credit to the devs, I don't actually think she's hard to play. So let's see if I can do her any justice while trying to use as little effort as possible to spare my sanity. Up front, she is definitely a meta choice. By far, the biggest impression I've had, without even playing her that much, is that Nangong is just an anomaly agent, who also happens to be a stun agent. Because of the whole stun angle, she absolutely slays when paired with Aria, but since she's also effectively a full anomaly agent, I don't see why she doesn't work in pretty much any Disorder team you want to run either. Disorder already works just fine without relying on stun, so Nangong is just that, plus the additional bonuses she has during stun, plus stunning faster. I imagine that you don't really struggle to build a team around Nangong, you just decide whether or not you want to use her. As for her core mechanics, she is a gauge which fills up over time as well as in small bursts anytime an anomaly is procced. To use these points, she has to charge her basic attack, which can be repeated up to 3 times. The second and third attacks are where the real damage and impact are and require half of her gauge each. To speed things up, you can skip the weaker first hit by charging after a chain attack, ultimate, or EX special. This charge attack, as well as her EX special, will activate some buffs, and since those are pretty standard attacks, you won't have to worry about maintaining those buffs. Those buffs are faster anomaly buildup and impact damage, just for her, and a team damage bonus on top of that. With her additional ability, she can also add a stun damage and stun duration buff as well, and she also buffs team anomaly buildup during stun, as well as chain attack anomaly buildup. Short version, during stun, she helps her team rapidly trigger disorders, unless you're spamming a blooms with Aria instead. The rest of her description really just covers a pair of anomaly damage procs that she can trigger during stun. Her additional ability is a pair of polarity disorders, just a pseudo disorder like Yanagi's, that she can trigger first with her EX special, a charged basic attack, or a quick assist. The first proc will trigger a reverse quick assist, and the next time she switches in, she'll immediately use a fully charged basic attack, triggering the second polarity disorder. Her other stun bonus is from her core skill and is in a bloom that triggers when stun ends. During stun, each time the enemy receives a bloom, disorder, or anomaly proc, they gain a stacking debuff up to a max of 4. Each stack increases the bloom damage by 25%, so double damage when you get all 4. Considering all of Nangong's perks, I don't think you'll need to work that hard to get all 4, as long as you can pull off a single disorder proc in the stun window. I think it's funny that the description highlights that this bloom will only trigger if the enemy is affected by an anomaly, because you'll have to have done something very wrong for the enemy to recover from stun without being affected by one. Finally, just to add more icing to an already well-iced cake, Nangong's core skill also gives her a healthy boost to her anomaly proficiency and anomaly mastery, and anomaly mastery increases her impact. I wasn't kidding when I called her an anomaly agent. I imagine you build her exactly like one. Oh, and her ultimate procs an Ether Veil. I don't think there's any gimmicks linked to that, but she is able to proc the keyword. Trivia. Nangong is our first limited agent who doesn't really feature in the story of her release chapter or have her own dedicated side story, so we don't know much about her. Now, this isn't entirely unprecedented, since it took until Season 2 for Ellen to get hers, but focusing on what little we can learn, for now, the only really clue we get for Nangong's backstory, other than her being rich and having a wicked scar, is from her demo. And I bounced off of that reveal at first, since her gimmick seems to be that she's literally perfect. The best at everything she tries. That doesn't exactly make for an interesting character. However, rewatching that video, after stewing on it for a bit, I did come to a subtle but important realization that softened my opinion a little. It's only on screen in that demo for a few seconds, and only a couple of scenes, but it seems clear to me that Nangong does not take any joy in winning. She does not enjoy being the best. What really gets Nangong out of bed every morning and drives all of her choices is using her power to help other people achieve their dreams, or at least goals if you think the word dreams is too strong. Nangong is talented enough to go off on her own and be a star of the entertainment world, guaranteed. But she would never, ever leave the Angels of Delusion, since what she really cares about is helping Sunna and Aria achieve their dreams. Nangong doesn't really want to be an idol. What she wants is for Aria and Sunna to realize their dream of being idols. And I'd wager that she's perfectly happy to stay indie, even if that's as far as they'll ever go. So I can't help but slightly appreciate how this characterization from the story ends up reflected in her combat design, where Nangong is this super good dual-role agent who also specializes in enabling her allies through both stun, disorder, and just so many keywords. And speaking of design, and using that perspective, there's something about the Angels team that I really appreciate. They are, without a doubt, a very strong team when all three run together. But with the exception of Aria, who they snuck in Lycon to prop up, none of the Angels' core gimmicks are dependent on any of the other Angels. Sunna is an attack support agent. Her core gimmick is a burst of bonus damage that relies on the strength of the character that triggers it. It's designed to work best with attack agents. Her additional ability, a stun damage bonus, is enabled by an attack agent, which the Angels don't have. She works quite well on just about any attack team, and her best partner, I think, is Shunguang, not Aria. Nangong is an anomaly disorder agent who also stuns. She has the same element as Aria, which means she cannot trigger disorders with Aria. All her bonus buildup, even her own anomaly stats, are sort of wasted when paired with Aria. The only reason the whole team works well together is because the devs shoehorned in some caveats into each character's core gimmicks. Sunna's Cat Scratch also works with anomaly agents, because for them they made it auto-crit and gave it a crit buff to boot, so that the anomaly agent that's missing attack and crit stats still contributes. The reason this doesn't just universally make Sunna useful for anomaly teams is because you'll either need to give up the stun bonus, honestly not the end of the world, or run an attack and anomaly agent together, which historically hasn't been that strong. Did I just hear something on the wind? In Nangong's case, the devs just made it so that Nangong stays out of Aria's way, on top of Aria wanting to be paired with a stun agent in the first place. Normally, Nangong's buffs make you want to swap characters in the stun window, not only to trigger her polarity disorders, but also by using her build-up buffs to rapidly pull off additional disorders during stun. Since Nangong can't proc those with Aria, they just give you her polarity disorders for free. There's no need to swap to Nangong at all during the stun window in order to trigger them when you're using Aria. What you're losing in disorders is more than made up for by just buffing Aria's already buffed Stunnablooms. On paper, these design choices aren't all that special, but in the money rules design world that we both do and don't live in, I think it's nice to see a team of agents that are intentionally designed to work together, intentionally designed to work well completely independent of each other. That's much better than if they had been designed to only work if you collect them all. And finally for the Angels, another minor thing I appreciate is how they were realized. Before they came out, other than the VTuber angle, I really expected their vibe and sound to be poppier, maybe more in a K-pop Demon Hunters direction, heavily produced trying to get a single up on the charts. So I was ultimately surprised across both the story and all of their EPs to hear them have a much more indie and quiet sound. Sanzi created a passionate yet very unpolished sound, and I appreciate what they made, even if none of their songs are something I'd slot into my regular playlists. My perception is that the Angels were designed with a focus on creating the characters instead of just being a marketing stunt. This commitment to character makes me really look forward to what the next album could be like. Metropolitan Order Department. Cissia. Slot. Versatile. Keywords. DPS. Pseudo-stun. Support. Ether Veil. I pulled Seed instead of Cissia, so there's a fair chance I'm missing some important details, but my current impression is that Cissia is just super simple to use. And that's not because she's designed as an off-field agent, because she's really not. Cissia's core gimmick is her Venom points. She starts with 3 and generates more in the usual ways: basic attack, finisher, EX special, chain attack, and ultimate. As long as she has points, every 5 seconds she'll deal an instance of damage as well as daze, called Corrode Bone. It's a decent chunk of damage, but having any points also enables her buffs, which are a defense reduction that only applies to electric agents, and from her additional ability, a crit damage buff. Between those two, she also buffs herself up to 18% crit rate and an additional 10% crit damage. She clearly is stronger when paired with other electric agents, but since she's always buffing herself, I wouldn't feel like I had to always run her with another electric agent. As for her versatility, aside from buffs and off-field damage, another unique quirk Cissia has is that she does not need to worry about overcapping her points. Anytime you exceed her maximum of 6 Venom points, she will immediately trigger Corrode Bone instead of wasting those points. Generating more points on field just means more damage. Generating a glut of points during stun, with a double chain, an ultimate, and multiple EX specials comboing into basic finishers, just means a lot more damage. On top of that burst potential, Cissia also starts with a point called Serpentine Shadow. She gains another after generating 6 points of Venom and can hold up to 3. You spend these points with a charged basic attack, which is a strong attack in itself, but will also immediately convert all of her Venom stacks into Corrode Bone damage. Aside from just being a strong attack, I suspect the best use of this is during the stun window, so you can trigger any remaining Venom stacks before the damage bonus wears off. Her EX special can also be channeled, spending up to 60 more energy, which I suspect is faster than casting 2 EX specials, and also triggers a reverse quick assist, even if you don't channel. In the summary, I cheekily said anywhere for her slot, but running her support may be a bit of a stretch. Her buffs may not be strong enough to warrant replacing a dedicated support, but I wouldn't let that stop me from trying. Want to run 3 attack agents using Seed? I would love to see it. Trivia. It's not the credit she deserves, because I haven't managed to find a good reference for who Cissia's English voice actor is, but all the love to her, whoever she ends up being, because she does an incredible job bringing Cissia to life. And the devs clearly love Cissia too. She's been a fantastic character in the story with some of the best and funniest animations, and it looks like she'll be sticking with us a little longer into Season 3. Consider Cissia another great example of let the devs cook. Weeks before her chapter released, a common thread was, who needs another electric attack agent? But I think that thread has now been thoroughly drowned out by her fans. Everything I love about ZZZ is present in this one character. This could be considered semantics, but I've seen a number of comments and videos that I think get this wrong, and I just want to make it clear. Cissia is not a police officer. She doesn't like people saying officer around her, it makes her jumpy, though she can also be amused by people calling her one, because she knows that she's not. She does have a badge, and she does work for the police commissioner, but she's also wearing shackles and has a shot collar. Cissia was a petty crook, and after her little night out in Lumina Square, now has an arrangement with Severian. I'll touch on some thoughts about this arrangement a bit more in my next video, but for now, let it be known that Cissia is a case specialist and not an actual police officer. She's effectively working public service in place of jail time. Severian has press-ganged her. Cunning Hairs. Starlight Billy. Slot, on-field DPS. Keywords, sheer force. Billy looks awesome, but the only thing I figured out during the story fights was that you can block with a special attack, which might be free, and I think filled his gauge faster. Hold down basic attack with a full gauge to trigger an AoE attack, that is all I managed to learn. You'll have to wait until the Season 3 version of this video to get anything better from me. Alright, we're in the home stretch. All we've got left are some updates for my Season 1 version and reviewing the changes agents received with their unlocked potentials. Let's get this done. For Lucy, I recommended that you sneak in an extra attack before you quick assist. As a correction, do not do this during her ultimate. At least, not until you see the first pig land. Lucy only has 3 pigs, and if you use a special before one lands, Lucy will teleport it out of the sky, cancelling a third of her ultimate's damage. So don't do that. You can still sneak one in before you quick assist, just make sure at least one pig is landed first, which is when the quick assist will prompt anyway. Just a bit of new advice, or at least preference, I've developed recently. The snappy, faster version of his EX special you can do after a successful dodge is not always the first thing on my mind when I'm dodging attacks. On top of that, Lighter already has an incredibly fast dodge counter, and I don't think it's worth trying to switch to his EX special instead of just using that dodge counter. What I've since learned is that during his Aura attacks, he can also use these, no enemy attack required. Just dodge and press special attack. This is a fast way to burn off Lighter's energy, and it doesn't cancel the existing combo like his normal EX special does, so you can easily mix it into his regular bursts. This is my new preferred way of spending Lighter's energy. In the Season 1 version, I didn't quite know how to use Yanagi's parry. I'm still not great with Yanagi, but I have at least figured out that part. The key is that you must be in the back half of her basic combo. Yanagi has 2 separate 5-hit combos, her stances. If you press special attack, then that attack will switch stances and your next attack will start at the 3rd move. To parry, you must be on either the 3rd, 4th, or 5th hit of her basic combo. If your combo has been reset, then you cannot parry. That's the only requirement. However, and this is important, you cannot cancel into that parry. Because you can't cancel into it, this means that I do not think you should try and use this defensively. What this parry really does, in practice, is make it so it's always safe to switch stances, ensuring that you won't drop your combo while doing so. Yanagi can and will parry any incoming attack for pretty much the whole duration of her stance switch, so that seems to be the primary purpose to me. If you're failing and you think your timing is solid, I'd say it's probably because you dropped your combo and didn't notice, or you're attacking and the input will be ignored because you can't cancel into it. Summary: stick to only switching stances at the end of your combo and you'll parry attacks passively during that stance switch. During the combo, you should be dodging. I still don't have Vivian. In fact, she's the only Season 1 character I don't have. So I don't have much I can add here. She gets some points, somehow. You activate them with her EX special, I think. and then I'm pretty sure that whenever another agent uses an EX special, she spends those activated points for a burst of a bloom damage. Season 2 has added several new Ether Weak, fire-resistant anomaly bosses, so Vivian has been getting a free ride all season long. As a fan of a certain fiery biker, I am very salty about this obvious bias. I've been using the survey to urge the devs to remove resistances from DA bosses, since this creates what I call a too many cuts problem, where after the boss mechanics, that last cut, resistances, ends up singling out specific agents. I want to run the laziest disorder team by combining Yuzuha and Bernice, but the devs keep putting sugar in her gas tank. Hugo is a ton of fun to play, but might not be as strong as you might like in the endgame content. He's basically got two curses affecting him right now. The first is his core design. He is a one-trick pony. Stun the enemy, EX special, enjoy the big number, and that's it. Don't get me wrong, it's a good trick, and I have yet to get tired of his voice just devouring the scenery every time he attacks. But stun windows were kind of the primary way of defeating bosses at launch, and so since launch, for variety and to keep gameplay from getting stale, a lot of new enemies resist the stun window in different ways, or shorten it, or delay it, and Hugo just ends up being the biggest loser every time they do that. The second curse is sharing an element with Miyavi. This hasn't been that bad for ice agents, since for example, I have still managed to use Ellen to clear DA bosses, from classics like Marionette to new ones like Wandering Hunter or Sobek. But tack on the increased frequency of ice resistance, combined with consistent stun tweaks, and Hugo doesn't currently have any strong matchups. Anyway, this is a less meta video, so that's enough of that. For me, the biggest highlight of running Hugo is playing dual stunners. It makes for a fun bit of variety. You are just trying to run a stun factory while playing with him. And I was serious about his scenery-chewing voice lines never getting old.
Heads for flowers that bloom in the abyss.
Do make sure you keep track of which enemy you're stunning, minion, elite, or boss, so you don't end up skipping his chain attack during a stun window. Using his chain attack buffs his totalized damage, which you trigger with either an EX special or an ultimate. You can follow up those attacks with a charge shot by holding down basic attack, which I use as a parting shot before swapping out. Don't do this in the tower though, he's not invulnerable during it. Keep an eye on his energy, since you can frequently sneak in an extra EX special outside stun. Hugo only needs 30 energy for his EX special, and you'll occasionally be using an ultimate instead, so he'll just naturally max out his energy if you don't burn off a little extra. Just don't use it all so you have one ready for the next stun. The only other advice I have for Hugo is to make sure you max out his crit rate as best you can. 88% because he has 12% from his core skill. Statistics can balance things out over time for other agents, but Hugo puts all of his eggs into one totalized basket. If you don't crit with that totalized, then you are losing out on a huge chunk of your team's damage. And as a final note, while testing Hugo for my co-op video, I ran him solo in Hollow Zero and found him to be surprisingly fun. You're not really benefiting from his totalized mechanic, so it isn't strong, but since most of his attacks and counters can be followed up by his charge shot, I found that the mix of those attacks and counters felt really good. I've never actually tried to use him hyper carry without stunners. And finally, let's review the changes we've gained from Unlock Potential in Season 2. I'm going to focus on gameplay changes, since describing each increase to a buff or new modifier bores me just thinking about it. Value changes, while important, are the least interesting part of the Unlock Potential changes. Also, just for fun, I will be covering each agent in the order of my least to most favorite changes. Do with that what you will. Sorry, Anby, but since I didn't pull you before your Unlock Potential came out, I can't even tell what changed. I think there's a new attack you gain after doing the triple special for a Thunderbolt that maybe only triggers when you're in her new dodge state. Other than that additional attack, I don't know what else the new dodge state adds, since enhanced dodge performance means nothing to me. You wanted to dodge counter attacks anyway to charge up the star mark faster, so I'm not aware of how this new state affects her gameplay. I think the only other addition to her gameplay is that allied aftershocks fill up her star marks now too. I'm not trying to be too dismissive of her changes. Soldier Zero is still a great and improved agent, but I can hardly tell what changed, so that's why she's my least favorite. Bernice's core changes are mostly just passive buffs, slightly faster ticks and damage boosts. She also gets a small anomaly mastery and damage buff from stacking energy regen, so she's gained a bit of build bias from that. As for what little gameplay change she does have, the first is from her charged basic attack, where she now gets an additional free tick of her off-field damage when using this ability. The damage itself isn't that significant, but it does let you generate her new Ember Flow point faster, which is generated by the number of ticks. I now try to remember to use this attack before swapping anytime I'm filling back up her heat gauge in order to benefit from this. The new Ember Flow point will trigger her new entry skill when you swap to her, where Bernice will do a flashy backflip attack over the enemy, while also triggering an instance of a bloom. Despite enjoying Bernice, her unlock potential is low in my favorites ranking because while the new attack looks great, the point required is pretty slow to generate, so she doesn't use it very often. Also, because her defensive assist has priority over her entry skill, I often fail to use it when I switch to her, since she'll end up blocking an attack instead. I suppose I could pay more attention to the enemy instead of just reacting to seeing the point, but that's not likely to happen anytime soon. Harumasa is on the lower half of this order, but I actually really like his changes. The only reason I'm holding him back is that with his new and improved changes, I have been playing him even worse. I keep trying to make up a plan on the spot and make bad choices instead. I need more practice. The biggest gameplay change is that he has a new alternate EX special attack that he can do after his basic combo or dash slashes. This attack is a bit faster than his normal EX special, at least I think it flows better, and in addition to generating Electro Orbs, it also immediately triggers them instead of you needing to hold the special attack for that. But much more importantly, it will only trigger enough orbs to max out the enemy's Electro Prison stacks. It will leave any extra orbs on the field instead of wasting them by overcapping stacks. I think the ideal goal is to have orbs on the field, then generate stacks by proccing more orbs, because overcapped orbs autofire, and then chain between consuming stacks with dashes and safely generating more of both orbs and stacks using the new EX special. Essentially, spending and generating orbs at the same rate, without ever wasting any. A veritable electro assembly line. That's possibly close to how you were supposed to use him before, but it's much easier to do with the new EX special. I'm just worse at it now. Another gameplay change is that Harumasa's ultimate is now buffed by his dash stacks, so you'll want to make sure you use it after at least 3 dash slashes, not before. Harumasa's ultimate also has a new follow-up attack, which also counts as ultimate damage. It's not a huge damage bonus, not anything like having a second ultimate, but extra damage is extra damage. Another change that technically affects gameplay, but that I mostly use by luck, is that Harumasa's first dash slash can now block an enemy attack. He can only block with that first slash, so you'll still be taking reduced damage from any subsequent dashes, but it's still a really satisfying sound when it does happen. I'm sure I'll like Harumasa's changes more given enough time. I think my tone has been a smidge negative over the last 3 agents, especially since we're talking about agent improvements here, so let's all take a palate-cleansing spoonful of sugar. Starting here with Lycaon, this ranking becomes much more about my personal preferences, because I am a huge fan of all 4 of these remaining changes. Lycaon was still a pretty popular stun agent for ice teams, especially for being a standard agent, so it was a bit surprising that they gave him an extra damage buff. Where Lycaon had his ice defense reduction before, he now also has a damage buff for all other elements. I agree that it seems a bit odd to give him a damage buff that doesn't affect ice damage, but it allows him to work on more teams, which is the heart and soul of this whole video, so you won't hear me complain about it. On top of that, his additional ability is now enabled by anomaly teammates. This was no doubt done just to support Aria's release, since she released at the end of 2.6, and Nangong wouldn't come out until the start of 2.7. Again, it's still just more freedom for team building, so I'm all for it. But the biggest change for Lycaon is that he has a new, I'm going to call it an AI state, that he can enter if you hold down basic attack after using him to defensive assist. Lycaon will use a new, stronger follow-up attack, and proc a reverse quick assist, and then he will remain on field, fighting alongside your active character. He'll cycle through the first 3 hits of his basic combo as your on-field character attacks, for up to 8 seconds, and after that he will repeat the new follow-up. If you switch to him, the time just pauses, so you don't need to worry about accidentally canceling this state if you swap to him. If you stop attacking, use a chain attack or ultimate, he'll immediately use the follow-up finisher, and any remaining time will buff the impact of his next new follow-up. Aside from the extra, stronger assist follow-up, this is mostly just a neat trick. The first 3 hits of his basic combo don't do a whole lot of damage and impact, but it does still feed the buff of his signature weapon, which is a nice touch, since normally he can only do that on field. Where I think it really shines, though, is that Lycaon will also mirror and use a dodge counter alongside your on-field agent. With an aggressive enemy and the right agent, you can deal out a series of double dodge counters that will add up to significant days buildup and decent damage to boot. Before this update, whenever I would play Hugo, I was running him with Lycaon and Lighter, preferring Lycaon as my on-field agent so I could make use of his signature weapon. Now with Lycaon's unlocked potential, I've swapped Lighter and Lycaon slots and absolutely love the feel of the two of them hammering out dodge counters, with Lighter's being one, if not the, fastest dodge counter in the game. And speaking of running him wildcard, Lycaon has the Bodyguard perk now. This hasn't actually been that useful of a perk this season, since while we've had no shortage of enemies that expect you to use multiple defensive assists in a row, they keep putting those enemies into a state where assists are free, so using one less assist point hasn't really mattered. I'm still error-prone with Ellen, but the devs 100% solved the deer in the headlights problem she had before. The biggest reason for that is that Ellen's charged scissor attack is now a hard parry and makes her invulnerable. No more does she dodge counter directly into being hit. Parrying an attack like this also gives her a full charge of flash freeze points, so you should absolutely feel free to charge headfirst into an enemy's oncoming attack. It feels great. You do still need to make sure you don't release the dodge button too soon and fail to enter the roaming state. Dash attacks still won't give you the result you're looking for. On top of that sweet change, if she has at least 2 flash freeze charges, she can follow up her charged scissor attack with a new flashy attack that she's fully invulnerable for. It basically replaces the first 2 hits of her basic combo, and you'll just naturally flow into it anytime you fully charge a scissor attack. Because you just naturally flow into it, I really feel like it's just the animators and designers playing favorites and showing off, as Ellen now freely swims and slashes through the air. The final new attack is her Icy Blade Wave, which you may remember from her gear in Hollow Zero. She'll trigger this at the end of the usual suspects of strong hits, combo finisher, assist, EX special. It's just nice additional damage, and once you learn when it's triggered, I think it's a good attack to tag out on. You will want to learn its timing so you're not canceling it too soon. On top of all that, the only thing I want to mention is that Ellen's basic attack combo finisher, the spinning blade attack, is still the strongest part of her combo, so you want to make sure you aren't skipping it just to charge in head first with more scissor parries. Ellen is still vulnerable during this attack, so you do need to pay attention to the enemy before you commit to it. The new Glacial Blade Wave looks fancier, but it's not worth skipping the combo finisher, unless you were going to be staggered anyway. If I had to guess, I'd say Soldier 11's changes are the most popular by far. The first major change is that she has a new combo finisher that's available when she has free fire suppression stacks. This attack does even more damage than her normal finisher, and scales further by consuming your free fire suppression points. That's a huge bonus to Soldier 11 mains, since the free fire suppression was kind of useless to those that had mastered her. I'm not one of them, I still don't have my fire suppression achievement. And you'll have no problem triggering that 5th hit of the combo, since she now always starts her combo on the 4th hit after an EX special, chain attack or ultimate, where you get most of your free fire suppression points. On top of that, those attacks now put Soldier 11 into an alert stance, where if she's attacked during a basic combo, about to take damage, she will automatically dodge one attack and use her new Fire Assault block counter. She can also use this new block counter manually by holding basic attack and can even run around while charging it. When a successful block counter is triggered, she gains 3 points of free fire suppression, which, depending on where you are in her combo, or your own timing, can of course be used for extra instances of that new basic attack finisher. And on top of that, another great change is that a dodge counter no longer resets Soldier 11's basic combo. Altogether, if you can master the timing to consistently trigger Soldier 11's fire suppression, she's now an incredibly aggressive attack agent who basically never has to stop and reset and is always on the offense. She won't perform well if you're a button masher, but dedicated Soldier 11 mains are being well rewarded. And if you've watched my full playlist, then there's a good chance you're not surprised that I'm biased towards Grace. Let me try to assure you that her changes are great, despite my obvious bias. I think a lot of people are sleeping on just how much better she is now. The most obvious change is that Grace can now trigger up to 4 Bloom procs after using her ultimate, when she spends a full stack of zap charges. She has a new attack to easily trigger all 4, which you can use by just holding down the special attack button. Grace will just rapidly start chucking an absurd number of grenades, each one building up a zap stack until the 8th procs in a bloom. I consider this an easy button, since I'm fairly certain that Grace does more total damage if you just build up those zap stacks with her normal zap 1, 2, 3, zap 4, zap, etc. combo. I don't even think that the easy button grenade spam is faster than 2 runs through her combo. Do note the first zap in that previous description. Grace now also gets full stacks of zap when she uses her ultimate, so you'll want to burn that before you try and build any more. The other changes Grace got, I can just summarize as can't stop, won't stop. She no longer resets her combo when moving side to side during it. She's now invulnerable when she's spending her zap points, EX special and regular, and she can now follow up her dodge counter with her basic attack 4, which I'll remind you also generates 8 zap in that one attack. The first two are incredibly nice benefits, since moving used to break her combo flow, and focusing on her zap pattern used to railroad you into getting hit, kinda like Ambi's. I can now confidently say that I no longer question whether it's worth using a regular special after the first 3 hits. Now, to be fair and open, that's also magnified by the fact that I picked up her signature weapon during the anniversary selector, and despite the odds, and because I have lost so many 50-50s this season, I have lucked my way into an M6 Grace. No doubt those are also juicing my opinion, since my version of her is hardly 1 cost. Still, I have absolutely been using her way more since her unlocked potential, successfully, in both Deadly Assault and Shiyu Defense, as both a disorder partner and just running her hyper carry Mono Shock. I've recently been testing her out with Sunna and Harumasa, running the long-lost Anomaly attack combo, and been doing surprisingly well. I still need to work on that team, but I think it's my Harumasa holding it back, not Grace. I'd really like to see what she can do with Cissia in Harumasa's slot, which would be much easier to run, but I can only do that in Hollow Zero for now. And that wraps up the Season 2 version of less meta team building. I really enjoy the process of sharing my experience, when I can manage to pull the character, and often find a few more surprises in the process of writing them up. Hopefully you enjoyed the results. For now, we're all moving into Season 3. And while I will be late to the party, I absolutely want to share my thoughts about what's been teased so far. That video should be ready in a week or so, since I've been heavily distracted thinking about it while trying to wrap up this video. If you want to hear those thoughts, make sure you're subscribed if you're not already. Thanks for listening, watching, and sharing.